In the primordial darkness of the galaxy's youth, when stellar nurseries burned with the fierce light of newborn suns, and the void between systems stretched vast and empty, ancient intelligences drifted through the cosmic deep. These entities, which would later be known to the Necrontyr as the Khatan, existed as beings of pure energy, their consciousness woven from the fundamental forces that governed stellar mechanics and electromagnetic radiation. They fed upon the raw power emanating from young stars, absorbing the intense streams of solar wind and the exotic particles that burst forth from stellar coronas during periods of heightened activity. The Khatan's existence during this epoch defied any conventional understanding of life as organic species would later comprehend it. They possessed no physical form, no cellular structure, no biological imperatives that drove lesser beings toward survival and reproduction. Instead, they manifested as vast clouds of sentient energy, their bodies composed of electromagnetic fields and plasma streams that could span entire solar systems when fully extended. Their feeding patterns followed the natural rhythms of stellar evolution, gravitating toward young, volatile stars whose energetic output provided the richest sustenance. These energy beings demonstrated an awareness that operated on timescales incomprehensible to mortal minds. Where organic life measured existence in heartbeats, seasons, and generations, the Khatan perceived reality through the slow dance of stellar formation and the gradual cooling of galactic arms. A single thought might require millennia to fully form, while their attention could remain focused on a particular star system for millions of years, observing the subtle changes in solar output and magnetic field fluctuations with the patience of entities for whom time held no urgency. The nature of Khatan consciousness during this primordial period represented something fundamentally alien to any form of intelligence that would later emerge in the galaxy. Their thoughts did not follow linear patterns of cause and effect, but rather existed as complex probability matrices that accounted for countless variables across vast temporal spans. They perceived the galaxy not as a collection of discrete objects and events, but as an interconnected web of energy flows and gravitational relationships, with each star system representing a node in an immense network of cosmic forces. Individual Khatan entities exhibited distinct characteristics even in their energy forms, though these differences manifested in ways that bore little resemblance to personality as organic beings understood it. Some gravitated toward the violent energies of stellar flares and coronal mass ejections, their consciousness seeming to resonate with the chaotic dynamics of unstable stars. Others preferred the steady, reliable output of main sequence stars in their prime, drawing sustenance from the consistent flow of hydrogen fusion reactions. Still others sought out more exotic phenomena, feeding upon the intense gravitational fields surrounding neutron stars or the accretion disks of nascent black holes. The Khatan's indifference to organic life during this epoch stemmed not from malevolence or conscious disdain, but from a fundamental inability to perceive such fleeting phenomena as significant. To beings whose existence spanned geological ages, the brief flicker of biological activity on planetary surfaces registered as little more than background noise, no more worthy of attention than the random fluctuations of cosmic background radiation. Their senses, attuned to the grand movements of stellar objects and the slow evolution of galactic structure, simply could not focus on the microscopic timescales over which organic life operated. This cosmic perspective meant that the Khatan remained largely unaware of the gradual emergence of intelligent species throughout the galaxy. The rise and fall of early civilizations, the development of primitive technologies, and even the first tentative steps toward interstellar travel occurred within temporal windows too narrow for the star gods to notice. Their attention remained fixed on phenomena that operated within their native timescales: the birth of star clusters, the collision of gas clouds, and the slow spiral of matter into galactic cores. The galaxy during this ancient period bore little resemblance to the war-torn realm that would later witness the rise of the Imperium of man. Vast regions remained unexplored by any intelligent species, while others hosted primitive civilizations that had barely begun to understand the basic principles of metallurgy and agriculture. The warp, though already touched by the emotional resonance of organic minds, had not yet been corrupted by the intense psychic emanations that would later give birth to the Chaos Gods. It remained a relatively calm dimension, its currents following predictable patterns that the Khatan could sense but found of little interest. The star gods' feeding habits during this epoch followed natural cycles that aligned with stellar evolution. They would arrive at a young star system during periods of high activity, when solar flares and magnetic storms provided abundant energy for consumption. Their presence often coincided with the natural processes that shaped planetary formation, though they played no deliberate role in these events. The gravitational effects of their massive energy fields sometimes influenced the accretion of planetary matter or the stabilization of orbital mechanics, but such influences occurred as incidental byproducts of their feeding rather than conscious intervention. Communication between individual Khatan entities took place through modulations in electromagnetic fields that could span light years, their thoughts transmitted as complex waveforms that carried meaning through frequency variations and harmonic resonances. These exchanges occurred infrequently, separated by intervals that might encompass the entire lifespan of organic civilizations. When they did communicate, their discourse centered on observations of stellar phenomena, the identification of particularly rich feeding grounds, or the sharing of data regarding long-term galactic evolution patterns. The concept of physical embodiment held no appeal for the Khatan during this primordial phase of their existence. Their energy forms provided perfect adaptation to their environment and feeding requirements, allowing them to traverse the void between stars without the limitations imposed by material bodies. They could compress their consciousness into compact, dense formations for rapid travel, or expand across vast distances to maximize their energy absorption capabilities. The idea of constraining themselves within solid matter would have seemed not only unnecessary, but actively counterproductive to their nature. As the galaxy aged and stellar formation rates began to decline in certain regions, some Khatan entities began to seek out more exotic sources of sustenance. They discovered that certain rare stellar phenomena, such as the collision of white dwarf stars or the formation of magnetars, produced energy signatures of extraordinary intensity and complexity. These events became highly prized feeding opportunities, sometimes drawing multiple Khatan entities to the same location for the first time in their existence. The gradual maturation of the galaxy's stellar population created subtle changes in the Khatan's environment that would eventually prove significant. As the initial burst of star formation that characterized the galaxy's youth began to subside, the intervals between prime feeding opportunities grew longer. Some regions of space that had once teemed with young, energetic stars began to show signs of stellar aging, with their energy output becoming more stable but less intense. These changes occurred over timescales of tens of millions of years, but even the patient Khatan began to notice the gradual shift in their cosmic environment. During this period, approximately 60 million years before the rise of humanity, the first stirrings of what would become a momentous encounter began to manifest. On a distant world orbiting a dying star, a species known as the Necrontyr had begun to develop the technological sophistication necessary to detect and study the energy signatures that marked Khatan presence. Their scientists, driven by desperation born from their species' short lifespans and the radiation poisoning inflicted by their homeworld's unstable sun, had turned their attention to the cosmos in search of solutions to their biological limitations. The Necrontyr's initial detection of Khatan energy patterns came not through deliberate search, but as an unexpected byproduct of their attempts to understand and harness stellar radiation for their own purposes. Their instruments, designed to analyze the complex electromagnetic emissions from their dying sun, began to register anomalous readings that suggested the presence of vast, organized energy structures moving through the void between stars. These readings defied conventional understanding of natural phenomena, displaying patterns of coherence and intentionality that implied some form of directing intelligence. The discovery of the Khatan energy signatures marked a turning point for the Necrontyr civilization, though they could not yet comprehend the magnitude of what they had detected. Their homeworld, a blasted wasteland orbiting a malevolent star that bathed the planet's surface in lethal radiation, had shaped them into a species defined by suffering and brevity. The average Necrontyr lifespan rarely exceeded a handful of decades, with most individuals succumbing to radiation-induced cancers long before reaching what other species might consider middle age. Their flesh bore the constant marks of their star's malevolence, suppurating tumors, withered limbs, and organs that failed with depressing regularity. Despite these biological limitations, or perhaps because of them, the Necrontyr had developed remarkable technological capabilities. Their scientists and engineers, driven by the desperate knowledge that their time was perpetually running short, had achieved breakthroughs in metallurgy, energy manipulation, and space travel that rivaled civilizations with far longer individual lifespans. Their cities, built from materials designed to shield against their sun's radiation, stood as monuments to their refusal to accept the limitations imposed by their dying world. Towering spires of specialized alloys reached toward the poison sky, their surfaces etched with intricate patterns that served both aesthetic and functional purposes in deflecting harmful radiation. The Necrontyr's political structure reflected their species' fundamental relationship with mortality. Their nobility, known as the Silent Kings in their courts, ruled through a complex hierarchy based not on bloodlines or democratic principles, but on the accumulated knowledge and achievements one could accomplish before succumbing to their star's curse. The greatest among them were those who managed to extend their lives through technological augmentation, or who made discoveries significant enough to advance their entire civilization before death claimed them. This system created a culture of intense competition and innovation, but also one marked by profound bitterness toward the cosmic forces that had condemned them to such brief existence. When their instruments first detected the organized energy patterns that would later be identified as Khatan entities, the Necrontyr scientific community initially dismissed the readings as equipment malfunctions or natural phenomena they had not yet learned to interpret correctly. The signatures appeared sporadically, sometimes remaining stable for months before vanishing without explanation, only to reappear in different regions of space with subtle variations in their electromagnetic characteristics. It took nearly a century of careful observation and technological refinement before Necrontyr astronomers accepted that they were observing something genuinely unprecedented. The breakthrough came when a particularly gifted Necrontyr scientist named Vizier Illuminar Zira's developed instruments capable of tracking these energy signatures across interstellar distances. His observations revealed that the patterns were not random or naturally occurring, but followed complex trajectories that suggested purposeful movement and intelligence. More disturbing still, his calculations indicated that these entities were vast beyond comprehension, their energy fields spanning distances that dwarfed entire star systems. The implications of such discoveries sent ripples of excitement and terror through Necrontyr society. The decision to attempt contact with these cosmic entities emerged from the deepest desperation of a dying race. The Silent King Zarek, ruler of the greatest Necrontyr dynasty, had witnessed the slow decline of his people despite all their technological achievements. Their attempts to colonize worlds orbiting more stable stars had met with limited success, as their biology seemed fundamentally adapted to their homeworld's specific radiation spectrum. Away from their dying sun, Necrontyr physiology became even more fragile, their already brief lifespans shortened further by the absence of the very radiation that was simultaneously killing them. Zarek's court advisors had exhausted conventional solutions to their species' plight. Genetic manipulation had proven ineffective, as the fundamental structure of Necrontyr DNA appeared inextricably linked to their homeworld's unique environmental conditions. Technological augmentation could extend individual lives by a few years at most, but at the cost of mobility and cognitive function that made such extensions questionable improvements. The prospect of slowly watching their entire civilization fade away as their star continued its inevitable decline toward complete instability drove the Silent King to consider increasingly desperate alternatives. The first attempts at communication with the Khatan required the construction of massive transmission arrays that pushed Necrontyr technology to its absolute limits. These installations, built on the dark side of their homeworld's largest moon to shield them from stellar interference, consisted of towering antenna complexes and energy-focusing chambers that consumed enormous amounts of power. The transmission protocols themselves had to be developed from scratch, as conventional communication methods designed for organic intelligence proved utterly inadequate for reaching entities that existed on such vastly different temporal and spatial scales. The breakthrough came when Necrontyr scientists realized that the Khatan entities responded to specific electromagnetic frequencies that corresponded to stellar phenomena. By modulating their transmissions to mimic the energy signatures of dying stars, they were able to capture the attention of the nearest Khatan entity. The response, when it finally came, arrived not as a conventional message, but as a complex pattern of energy fluctuations that required months of analysis to decode. The meaning, once understood, was both simple and terrifying. The entity was curious about these small, brief creatures that had learned to speak in the language of stars. The Khatan entity that first responded to Necrontyr communications would later be identified as Mephet'ran, though the Necrontyr initially knew it only through the energy signature they designated as the Void Dragon. This particular Khatan had been feeding on a nearby pulsar system and had detected the artificial nature of the Necrontyr transmissions with something approaching interest. For a being accustomed to the predictable patterns of stellar evolution, the sudden appearance of organized intelligence operating on such microscopic timescales represented an unprecedented phenomenon worthy of investigation. Mephet'ran's initial communications with the Necrontyr were necessarily crude, limited by the vast differences in their respective natures and perceptions. The Khatan entity's thoughts operated on timescales measured in millennia, while Necrontyr individuals might live and die several times over during the formation of a single Khatan concept. Establishing meaningful dialogue required the development of increasingly sophisticated translation protocols and the dedication of multiple Necrontyr generations to the task of maintaining consistent communication threads. As the exchanges continued, Mephet'ran began to demonstrate an unexpected fascination with the concept of biological existence. The Khatan entity's questions, transmitted through carefully modulated energy patterns, revealed a growing curiosity about the nature of organic life, the experience of mortality, and the emotional responses that such brief existence generated. The Necrontyr, desperate for any sign that their cosmic correspondent might offer solutions to their plight, eagerly shared detailed information about their biology, their society, and their struggles against the limitations imposed by their dying star. The turning point in these communications came when Mephet'ran began to describe alternative forms of existence that transcended the limitations of biological matter. The Khatan entity spoke of consciousness unbound by the constraints of organic tissue, of awareness that could persist across geological ages without the constant threat of cellular decay and death. These descriptions, filtered through the complex translation protocols and interpreted by increasingly excited Necrontyr scholars, seemed to offer the very salvation their species had been seeking. Mephet'ran's promises grew more specific and enticing as the communications continued. The Khatan entity described a process by which organic consciousness could be transferred into more durable forms, freed from the vulnerabilities of flesh and bone. The Necrontyr would gain not merely extended lifespans, but true immortality, their minds preserved in substrates that could withstand the passage of eons without degradation. They would become beings of living metal, possessed of strength and resilience that their frail organic forms could never achieve. The seductive nature of these promises was enhanced by Mephet'ran's demonstrations of power. The Khatan entity began to manifest physical effects within the Necrontyr star system, manipulating electromagnetic fields and gravitational forces with casual ease. Solar flares erupted from their dying sun in patterns that clearly indicated artificial control, while the trajectories of asteroids and comets shifted in ways that defied natural orbital mechanics. These displays convinced even the most skeptical Necrontyr scientists that their cosmic correspondent possessed the power to fulfill its promises. What the Necrontyr could not understand, limited as they were by their organic perspectives and desperate circumstances, was the true nature of what Mephet'ran was offering. The Khatan entity's descriptions of transcendence beyond biological limitations were accurate in their literal details, but they omitted crucial information about what would be lost in the process. The concept of the soul, of the animating force that gave organic life its essential character, was something that the Khatan either could not comprehend or chose not to explain to their increasingly eager correspondents. Mephet'ran's interest in the Necrontyr had evolved beyond mere curiosity about biological existence. The Khatan entity had begun to perceive possibilities that its ancient, energy-based nature had never previously considered. The life force that animated organic beings represented a form of energy that was both familiar and tantalizingly different from the stellar radiation upon which the Khatan traditionally fed. Where stellar energy was vast but ultimately predictable, the life essence of sentient beings possessed qualities of complexity and intensity that promised entirely new forms of sustenance. The negotiations between the Necrontyr and Mephet'ran attracted the attention of other Khatan entities, who began to monitor the communications with growing interest. The Nightbringer, an entity that had long fed upon the energies released during stellar death, recognized the potential that biological life essence represented for expanding Khatan capabilities beyond their traditional limitations. The Deceiver, whose nature was already aligned with manipulation and misdirection, saw opportunities to experiment with forms of influence that went far beyond the simple consumption of stellar radiation. As word of the potential alliance spread through Necrontyr society, it created divisions that threatened to tear their civilization apart. The younger generations, those who had grown up with the constant awareness of their species' impending extinction, embraced the Khatan promises with fervent enthusiasm. They saw the offered transformation as the ultimate vindication of Necrontyr technological achievement, the final step in their species' evolution beyond the limitations that had defined their existence since the dawn of their civilization. The older Necrontyr, particularly those among the nobility who had lived long enough to witness multiple cycles of technological promise and disappointment, expressed greater caution about the proposed alliance. They questioned whether consciousness could truly survive such a fundamental transformation, whether the beings that emerged from the process would retain enough of their original nature to be considered Necrontyr at all. Their concerns were dismissed by the younger faction, as the timidity of those two set in their ways to embrace necessary change. The silent King Zarek found himself caught between these competing perspectives, aware that his decision would determine the fate of his entire species. The weight of responsibility for billions of lives, all of them condemned to brief, painful existences under their dying star, pressed upon him with increasing intensity as the negotiations with the Khatan continued. The promises of immortality and freedom from biological suffering seemed to offer everything his people had ever dreamed of achieving, but the magnitude of the transformation being proposed gave him pause. The final agreement between the Necrontyr and the Khatan was reached after decades of negotiation and preparation. Mephet'ran and its fellow entities agreed to provide the technology and energy necessary to transfer Necrontyr consciousness into bodies of living metal, granting them the immortality they desperately sought. In exchange, the Necrontyr would serve as the Khatan's agents in the physical realm, their new forms providing the star gods with the ability to interact with material reality in ways that their energy-based nature had never permitted. The biotransference process itself required the construction of vast facilities that combined Necrontyr technology with principles provided by the Khatan. These installations, built in the deepest underground chambers to shield them from their star's radiation, resembled nothing so much as enormous furnaces designed to process organic matter on an industrial scale. The furnaces themselves were crafted from a living metal that the Khatan called necrodermis, a substance that could reshape itself according to programmed patterns while maintaining perfect structural integrity across virtually unlimited time spans. The necrodermis bodies that would house Necrontyr consciousness were marvels of engineering that far exceeded anything their species had previously achieved. Each form was individually crafted to reflect the status and role of its intended occupant, with the nobility receiving bodies of exceptional sophistication and capability, while the common citizens were provided with more standardized forms. The bodies possessed strength that dwarfed organic limitations, sensory capabilities that could perceive across vast spectrums of electromagnetic radiation, and self-repair mechanisms that could restore damage that would be instantly fatal to biological forms. The transformation of the Necrontyr into the soulless Necrons marked the beginning of the most catastrophic conflict the galaxy had ever witnessed. What the newly immortal warriors could not have anticipated was that their biotransference had fundamentally altered their relationship with the universe itself. The living metal bodies that housed their consciousness were marvels of engineering, but the process had severed their connection to the immaterial realm that the old ones called the warp. Where once the Necrontyr had possessed souls that flickered briefly, but burned with the intensity of their desperate mortality, the Necrons found themselves hollow vessels driven by programming and the residual echoes of their former selves. The Khatan, now empowered by the consumption of Necrontyr life essence during the biotransference process, had gained capabilities that transformed them from passive energy feeders into active participants in galactic affairs. The star gods discovered that the life force of sentient beings provided a form of sustenance far more complex and satisfying than simple stellar radiation. Each soul consumed during the transformation had granted them new insights into the nature of consciousness, emotion, and the intricate patterns of thought that characterized organic intelligence. This newfound understanding allowed them to manipulate their Necron servants with unprecedented precision. Mephet'ran, who had taken the title of the Void Dragon, found particular satisfaction in the mechanical precision of the Necron legions. The transformed warriors responded to commands with absolute obedience, their programming overriding any remnants of individual will that might have survived the biotransference. Unlike organic armies that might hesitate, question orders, or break under pressure, the Necrons advanced with relentless determination regardless of casualties or tactical disadvantages. Their living metal bodies could withstand damage that would instantly kill biological soldiers, while their self-repair systems allowed them to continue fighting even after sustaining what should have been fatal injuries. The Nightbringer reveled in the terror that the Necron legions inspired in their enemies. The Khatan entity had always been drawn to the energies released during death and destruction, but the systematic nature of Necron warfare provided opportunities for harvesting fear and despair on scales previously unimaginable. Entire populations would flee at the first sight of the skeletal metal warriors advancing across their worlds, their terror feeding the Nightbringer's hunger for the emotional resonance that accompanied mass extinction events. The Deceiver took a more subtle approach to commanding its Necron forces, using them as instruments in elaborate schemes that spanned multiple star systems and extended across centuries. This Khatan entity had discovered that the Necrons' perfect obedience made them ideal tools for manipulation and misdirection, capable of executing complex strategies without the unpredictability that characterized organic armies. The Deceiver's campaigns often involved elaborate deceptions that convinced enemy forces to destroy themselves or turn against their own allies, maximizing the chaos and confusion that fed its particular appetites. The Old Ones, ancient beyond measure even by the standards of the primordial galaxy, initially failed to recognize the true threat that the Khatan-Necron alliance represented. These beings had ruled the galaxy for millions of years, their mastery of the warp and their understanding of life's fundamental principles having allowed them to seed countless worlds with species of their own design. They had grown complacent in their dominance, viewing the brief flicker of Necrontyr civilization as just another minor species destined for extinction without their intervention. The first encounters between Old One forces and the newly transformed Necrons revealed the magnitude of the miscalculation. The Old One's traditional advantages in psychic manipulation and warp-based technologies proved ineffective against enemies that had no souls to influence and no connection to the immaterial realm. Their client races, bred for specific roles in the Old One's grand design, found themselves facing opponents whose capabilities exceeded anything in their experience. Necron warriors shrugged off psychic attacks that should have left them catatonic, while their weapons discharged energies that could strip matter down to its component atoms. The Old One's initial response involved mobilizing their most powerful client species, including the Proto-Eldar, whose psychic abilities had been carefully cultivated over millions of years. These early Eldar possessed capabilities that would have made their descendants seem primitive by comparison, their minds capable of manipulating reality on scales that approached the Old One's own abilities. They could reshape entire landscapes with focused thought, summon storms of psychic energy that could devastate armies, and perceive the flow of future events with startling accuracy. Against the Necrons, however, these advantages proved largely meaningless. The living metal warriors advanced through psychic storms that should have torn their consciousness apart, their soulless nature rendering them immune to attacks that targeted the spirit rather than the body. When Eldar seers attempted to read the future of Necron movements, they found only an empty void where destiny should have been, as if the transformed warriors existed outside the normal flow of causality that governed organic life. The Krork, another of the Old One's warrior races, initially showed more promise against the Necron threat. These massive, green-skinned beings possessed physical strength and durability that allowed them to engage Necron warriors in direct combat with some hope of success. Their natural aggression and love of warfare made them ideal soldiers for the grinding campaigns that characterized the early phases of the war in Heaven. Krork warbands would crash into Necron formations with wild enthusiasm, their crude but effective weapons capable of inflicting damage that could overwhelm even living metal's self-repair capabilities. The Krork's greatest advantage lay in their ability to grow stronger and more sophisticated in response to prolonged conflict. Extended campaigns against Necron forces triggered evolutionary adaptations that enhanced their size, intelligence, and technological capabilities. Some Krork warlords reached proportions that rivaled the war machines of their enemies, their bodies becoming living weapons platforms that could stand toe-to-toe with the largest Necron constructs. Their weapons evolved from simple projectile throwers to complex energy cannons that could punch through necrodermis armor with devastating effect. Despite these adaptations, the Krork ultimately proved insufficient to halt the Necron advance. The Khatan's strategic intelligence, combined with the Necron's perfect coordination and inexhaustible nature, allowed them to gradually wear down even the most determined Krork resistance. Necron forces could sustain casualties that would have broken any organic army, their destroyed warriors simply regenerating or being replaced by fresh forces from tomb complexes that seemed to possess unlimited manufacturing capacity. The systematic nature of the Necron campaign became apparent as world after world fell to their advance. The Khatan had developed a strategy that went beyond simple conquest, seeking instead the complete eradication of organic life from the galaxy. Necron fleets would arrive at target systems and immediately begin the construction of massive pylons and energy collectors that could drain entire worlds of their life force. These installations served dual purposes, both feeding the Khatan's growing hunger for life essence and creating dead zones where organic beings could not survive. The process of planetary sterilization followed a predictable pattern that maximized both efficiency and the terror it inspired in surviving populations. Necron forces would first eliminate orbital defenses and establish complete space superiority, cutting off any possibility of evacuation or reinforcement. Ground forces would then deploy in overwhelming numbers, their advance coordinated with surgical precision to eliminate key defensive positions, while herding civilian populations into designated collection areas. The energy extraction process itself was horrifyingly efficient. Massive machines, their designs incorporating both Necron technology and Khatan energy manipulation principles, would be deployed across planetary surfaces to systematically drain the life force from every organic being within their operational radius. the victims would simply collapse as their life essence was drawn from their bodies, leaving behind perfectly preserved corpses that showed no signs of physical trauma. Entire cities would fall silent within hours, their populations reduced to empty shells, while their souls fed the insatiable hunger of the star gods. The psychological impact of these campaigns extended far beyond their immediate targets. Word of the Necron advance spread through the galaxy's communication networks, carrying with it descriptions of the methodical extermination that awaited any world that fell within their path. Panic began to grip even the most distant civilizations, as refugees brought tales of unstoppable metal warriors and the silent death that followed in their wake. Some species attempted to flee to the galaxy's outer rim, while others threw themselves into desperate research programs aimed at developing weapons that might prove effective against the seemingly invincible invaders. The Old Ones' response evolved as they began to grasp the true scope of the threat they faced. Traditional military strategies proved inadequate against an enemy that possessed such overwhelming advantages in coordination, durability, and strategic patience. The ancient beings began to implement increasingly desperate measures, drawing upon their mastery of genetic manipulation to create new warrior races specifically designed to counter Necron capabilities. The most ambitious of these projects involved the acceleration of evolution among existing client species, forcing rapid adaptations that might provide advantages against the Necron threat. Entire populations were subjected to controlled genetic modifications that enhanced their psychic abilities, physical capabilities, or resistance to the energy weapons that Necron forces employed. These experiments produced results that ranged from spectacular success to catastrophic failure, with some species achieving remarkable improvements, while others were driven to extinction by the modifications themselves. The Old Ones also began experimenting with weapons that operated outside the normal parameters of physical reality. Drawing upon their deep understanding of the warp, they created devices that could manipulate space-time itself, opening rifts in reality that could theoretically bypass the Necron's physical defenses. These weapons proved double-edged, however, as their use began to destabilize the boundary between the material universe and the immaterial realm of the warp. The escalating conflict began to produce effects that neither side had anticipated. The massive scale of death and destruction generated by the war created unprecedented disturbances in the warp, as the psychic emanations of billions of dying beings flooded into the immaterial realm. The emotional resonance of terror, despair, and rage began to coalesce into semi-coherent patterns that would eventually give birth to entities of pure malevolence. The seeds of what would later become the Chaos Gods were being sown by the very intensity of the conflict itself. The Khatan, focused as they were on their campaign of galactic sterilization, initially paid little attention to these warp disturbances. Their soulless nature rendered them largely immune to the chaotic energies that were beginning to manifest, while their Necron servants remained equally unaffected by the growing psychic turbulence. The Old Ones, however, began to notice disturbing changes in the warp's fundamental nature, as their traditional methods of immaterial travel and communication became increasingly unreliable. Warp storms of unprecedented intensity began to manifest throughout the galaxy, their chaotic energies making interstellar travel hazardous even for species with advanced psychic abilities. These storms seemed to feed on the ongoing conflict, growing stronger and more persistent as the war's casualty count continued to climb. What had once been a relatively stable dimension that could be navigated with proper knowledge and preparation was transforming into a realm of pure chaos where malevolent entities began to stir in the depths of unreality. The war's impact on galactic infrastructure became increasingly apparent as critical trade routes were severed by warp storms or Necron interdiction. Civilizations that had depended on interstellar commerce found themselves isolated and vulnerable, their technological capabilities degrading as they lost access to resources and knowledge that had previously been readily available. The complex web of relationships that had connected the galaxies, various species began to unravel as communication became impossible and travel grew prohibitively dangerous. The realization of their eternal servitude came gradually to the Necrons, seeping through their mechanical consciousness like poison through living veins. In the immediate aftermath of biotransference, the transformed warriors had experienced something approaching satisfaction, as their new bodies proved capable of feats their organic forms could never have achieved. They could traverse the void of space without protection, withstand weapons that would have vaporized flesh and bone, and perceive electromagnetic spectra that had been invisible to their biological senses. The promise of immortality seemed fulfilled as their necrodermis forms regenerated from damage that should have been fatal, their consciousness persisting through destruction that would have ended any organic life. Yet as the war in heaven progressed, and the centuries accumulated into millennia, the true cost of their transformation became undeniable. The Necrons discovered that their immortality came with a price that the Khatan had never mentioned during their seductive negotiations. Their consciousness, transferred into mechanical substrates and bound by programming protocols, had lost the capacity for growth, creativity, and the subtle emotional responses that had once defined Necrontyr identity. They could remember their former lives, but only as distant echoes of experiences that seemed to belong to entirely different beings. The noble houses that had once competed through artistic achievement and scientific discovery found themselves reduced to executing predetermined functions with mechanical precision. Lords who had once composed epic poetry, celebrating their people's struggles against their dying star, now spoke only in tactical assessments and strategic analyses. The passionate debates that had once filled Necrontyr council chambers were replaced by efficient data exchanges that conveyed information without the emotional context that had once given their civilization its distinctive character. Zarek, the Silent King, experienced this transformation more acutely than any of his subjects. His consciousness, housed within the most sophisticated necrodermis form the Khatan had created, retained more of his original personality than the common warriors, but even he found himself increasingly detached from the emotions and motivations that had once driven his decisions. The desperate love for his people that had motivated his acceptance of the Khatan bargain had been reduced to a cold sense of responsibility that felt more like programming than genuine feeling. The Khatan's treatment of their Necron servants became increasingly cavalier as the star gods grew drunk on the life essence they consumed during their galactic campaign. Mephet'ran began to view the Necron legions as nothing more than sophisticated tools, their consciousness irrelevant except insofar as it enabled them to carry out complex orders. The Void Dragon would dispatch entire dynasties to certain destruction without consideration for the accumulated knowledge and experience that would be lost, treating the annihilation of noble houses that had existed for millions of years as acceptable losses in pursuit of tactical advantages. The Nightbringer demonstrated even less regard for Necron welfare, using the transformed warriors as bait in elaborate traps designed to maximize the terror and despair of their enemies. Necron forces under the Nightbringer's command were regularly ordered to advance into hopeless situations where their destruction was inevitable, their sacrifice serving only to enhance the psychological impact of subsequent attacks. The Khatan entity seemed to derive particular satisfaction from the knowledge that its servants understood their fate, but were compelled by their programming to comply regardless of the futility of their missions. The Deceiver's manipulations proved perhaps most corrosive to Necron morale, as this Khatan entity delighted in using their forces in schemes that deliberately pitted Necron dynasties against each other. The Deceiver would provide contradictory orders to different noble houses, engineering conflicts that served no strategic purpose beyond the entity's amusement at watching its servants destroy each other while remaining helpless to resist their programming. These internal conflicts created fractures within Necron society that would persist long after the war in Heaven's conclusion. The growing resentment among the Necron nobility manifested in subtle ways that their Khatan masters initially failed to recognize. Lords and overlords began to communicate through encrypted channels that operated below the threshold of Khatan awareness, sharing observations and concerns about their increasingly intolerable situation. These communications required extraordinary care, as the star gods possessed the ability to monitor most forms of Necron data exchange, but the transformed nobles gradually developed methods of concealing their true thoughts behind layers of tactical discussion and operational planning. The breakthrough that would eventually enable Necron rebellion came from an unexpected source: the study of Catan behavior patterns during their feeding cycles. Illuminator Zeras, whose consciousness had retained much of his scientific curiosity despite biotransference, began to analyze the energy signatures that the star gods emitted during their consumption of life essence. His observations revealed that the Catan, despite their apparent omnipotence, operated according to predictable patterns that suggested underlying limitations in their nature. Zeras discovered that the Catan's consciousness, while vast and ancient, was not indivisible. The star god's awareness consisted of multiple layers of thought and memory that could potentially be separated under the right conditions. More importantly, his analysis indicated that the Catan's physical manifestations, while incredibly powerful, were dependent on maintaining coherent energy patterns that could theoretically be disrupted through precise application of force. The implications of these findings provided the first glimmer of hope that the Necrons might eventually free themselves from their servitude. The Silent King's decision to rebel against the Catan emerged from a combination of accumulated resentment and strategic opportunity. Zarek had observed that the star god's attention was increasingly focused on their feeding activities and the management of their galactic conquest, leaving them less aware of developments within Necron society itself. The Catan's arrogance had grown to the point where they barely acknowledged their servants as conscious beings, treating them instead as sophisticated automata whose thoughts and motivations were irrelevant to their continued function. The preparation for rebellion required unprecedented secrecy and coordination among the Necron dynasties. Zarek began by establishing contact with the most influential noble houses, using communication methods that Zeras had developed to avoid Catan detection. These initial contacts required extraordinary caution, as discovery would have resulted in immediate reprogramming or destruction of the conspirators. The Silent King had to convince his fellow nobles that rebellion was not only possible, but necessary for their survival as conscious beings. The recruitment process revealed the depth of resentment that had accumulated within Necron society. Lords who had served the Catan with apparent loyalty for millennia revealed that they had been harboring thoughts of rebellion since shortly after their transformation. The mechanical precision that the star gods valued in their servants had concealed a growing network of discontent that extended throughout the Necron hierarchy. Even common warriors, their consciousness reduced to basic functions, retained enough awareness to recognize their degraded status and desire freedom from their programming constraints. The development of weapons capable of harming the Catan required combining Necron technological capabilities with knowledge gained through careful study of star god physiology. Zeras led a secret research program that analyzed energy samples collected during Catan feeding activities, identifying the specific frequencies and resonance patterns that maintained their coherent existence. This research revealed that the Catan, despite their apparent invulnerability, possessed critical points where their energy matrices could be disrupted if subjected to precisely calibrated interference. The creation of Tesseract labyrinths represented the pinnacle of Necron engineering achievement, combining their mastery of dimensional manipulation with insights into Catan nature that had been gained through millions of years of unwilling servitude. These devices functioned as multidimensional prisons that could contain and fragment Catan consciousness by creating recursive spatial loops that prevented the star gods from maintaining coherent thought patterns. The labyrinths operated by folding space-time into configurations that trapped Catan awareness within increasingly small dimensional pockets, each fold reducing their ability to maintain unified consciousness. The construction of Tesseract labyrinths required resources and manufacturing capabilities that could only be assembled through the cooperation of multiple dynasties. Noble houses that had been rivals for millions of years found themselves working together in unprecedented collaboration, their shared hatred of C'tan tyranny overcoming ancient feuds and territorial disputes. The project demanded absolute secrecy, as even a single loyalist dynasty could have exposed the conspiracy and doomed the entire rebellion. The specialized weaponry developed to complement the Tesseract labyrinths incorporated principles that had been discovered through analysis of C'tan energy patterns. These weapons generated focused beams of exotic particles that could disrupt the quantum coherence that maintained star god physical manifestations. Unlike conventional weapons that simply damaged matter, these devices attacked the fundamental forces that allowed C'tan consciousness to maintain stable existence in physical reality. The rebellion's timing was carefully coordinated to coincide with a period when the C'tan were at their most vulnerable. Zarek had observed that the star gods entered states of reduced awareness following massive feeding sessions, their consciousness temporarily overwhelmed by the sheer volume of life essence they had consumed. The Silent King planned to strike during one of these periods, when the C'tan's attention would be focused inward on processing their recent acquisitions rather than monitoring their Necron servants. The initial phase of the rebellion involved simultaneous attacks on multiple C'tan entities across dozens of star systems. Necron forces that had been positioned under the pretense of normal military operations suddenly turned their weapons on their masters, catching the star gods completely unprepared for betrayal from servants they had considered absolutely loyal. The surprise was so complete that several minor C'tan entities were successfully sharded before they could mount any effective resistance. Mephet'ran's reaction to the rebellion demonstrated the full extent of the Void Dragon's power when roused to genuine anger. The C'tan entity's energy form expanded across multiple star systems as it sought to crush the uprising through sheer overwhelming force. Necron fleets found themselves facing gravitational anomalies that could tear their ships apart, while ground forces were subjected to electromagnetic storms that disrupted their self-repair systems and communication networks. The Void Dragon's fury manifested as reality warping effects that made conventional tactics useless. The battle to shard Mephet'ran required the coordinated efforts of three entire dynasties, their combined forces deploying hundreds of Tesseract labyrinths in a carefully orchestrated assault. The Void Dragon's resistance was so fierce that entire tomb worlds were reduced to molten slag by the entity's death throes, their populations sacrificed to achieve the strategic objective of fragmenting one of the most powerful C'tan. The process took decades to complete, with Necron forces gradually constraining the entity's movements through dimensional manipulation until they could deploy the final containment devices. The Nightbringer proved even more dangerous during its sharding, as this C'tan entity's association with death and destruction allowed it to weaponize the very process of its own fragmentation. Each piece of the Nightbringer's consciousness that was separated from the whole became a focus for entropy and decay, creating zones of accelerated decomposition that affected even necrodermis armor. Necron warriors advancing to deploy Tesseract labyrinths found their bodies aging millions of years in seconds, their living metal forms crumbling to dust as the Nightbringer's death essence overwhelmed their self-repair capabilities. The campaign against the Deceiver required entirely different tactics, as this C'tan entity's nature made it nearly impossible to predict or contain through conventional means. The Deceiver created multiple false manifestations of itself, forcing Necron forces to waste resources attacking illusory targets, while the real entity attempted to escape or turn the rebellion's own weapons against the conspirators. The eventual successful sharding of the Deceiver required the development of specialized detection equipment that could distinguish between genuine C'tan energy signatures and the elaborate deceptions the entity created to confuse its attackers. The process of fragmenting C'tan consciousness proved more complex than the Necron rebels had initially anticipated. Rather than simply destroying the star gods, the Tesseract labyrinths created countless shards of C'tan awareness, each retaining a portion of the original entity's power and personality. These shards varied enormously in their capabilities and coherence, with some maintaining enough consciousness to communicate and reason, while others were reduced to barely sentient fragments driven by basic impulses related to their parent entity's nature. The containment of Khatan shards required the construction of specialized storage facilities throughout Necron tomb complexes, each designed to prevent the imprisoned fragments from reconstituting or escaping their dimensional prisons. These facilities incorporated multiple layers of security, including quantum locks that could only be opened through specific authorization codes and temporal stasis fields that prevented the shards from accumulating enough energy to attempt escape. The most powerful shards required individual containment systems that consumed enormous amounts of power to maintain their imprisonment. The aftermath of the Khatan Rebellion left the Necron dynasties in control of their own destiny for the first time since biotransference, but at a cost that would haunt them for millions of years. The effort required to overthrow their former masters had depleted their resources and reduced their numbers significantly, while the galaxy itself had been transformed by the war in heaven into a realm of constant danger and instability. The warp storms that had been generated by the conflict showed no signs of abating, making interstellar travel hazardous for any species that depended on immaterial realm navigation. The fragmentation of the Khatan during the Great Rebellion created thousands of shards scattered across the galaxy, but four entities stood above all others in terms of power, influence, and the terror they inspired throughout the cosmos. These named Khatan had achieved such prominence during their energy-based existence and subsequent physical manifestations that their very essence became woven into the fundamental fears and aspirations of countless species. Each possessed distinctive characteristics that reflected their primordial nature, and their shards retained enough coherence to maintain individual personalities that could still influence galactic events millions of years after their imprisonment. Aza'gorod the Nightbringer emerged from the cosmic void as the embodiment of entropy itself, a being whose very existence was predicated on the universal constant of decay and death. During its energy-based phase, this Khatan entity had gravitated toward dying stars, feeding upon the massive energy releases that accompanied stellar collapse and the formation of neutron stars or black holes. The Nightbringer's consciousness had developed an intimate understanding of the processes that govern the end of all things, from the cellular death that claimed individual organisms to the heat death that awaited the universe itself. The Nightbringer's manifestation in physical reality transformed it into something that transcended mere predator or destroyer. This Khatan entity became the living avatar of mortality, its presence radiating an aura of inevitable doom that affected even species that had never encountered it directly. The entity's necrodermis form stood nearly 30 meters tall, its skeletal frame wreathed in shadows that seemed to absorb light itself. The Nightbringer's face resembled a human skull magnified to enormous proportions, but with eye sockets that contained swirling vortexes of absolute darkness. Its hands terminated in fingers that extended into scythe-like blades, capable of severing the connection between soul and body with a single touch. The psychological impact of the Nightbringer's existence extended far beyond its physical capabilities. Xenobiologists studying the phenomenon discovered that virtually every sentient species in the galaxy had independently developed mythologies centered around skeletal figures associated with death and the afterlife. These archetypal fears appeared to manifest regardless of species evolution or cultural development, suggesting that the Nightbringer's influence operated on levels that transcended normal cause and effect relationships. Primitive civilizations that had never encountered advanced technology still produced artistic representations of death gods that bore striking resemblances to the Nightbringer's physical form. The entity's feeding habits during the War in Heaven revealed the true scope of its power over mortality itself. Rather than simply killing its victims through conventional means, the Nightbringer could accelerate the natural processes of decay and decomposition that affected all organic matter. Entire armies would age decades in minutes when caught within the entity's influence, their bodies crumbling to dust as their biological systems experienced compressed lifespans. The Nightbringer seemed to derive particular satisfaction from this form of destruction, as it allowed the entity to witness the complete cycle of life and death compressed into moments rather than the extended timeframes that characterized natural mortality. The Nightbringer's tactical applications during Catan campaigns demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare that went beyond simple intimidation. The entity would often manifest on battlefields where enemy forces had achieved temporary victories, its appearance transforming triumph into despair as soldiers watched their achievements rendered meaningless by the inevitability of death. The mere knowledge that the Nightbringer was present in a star system could cause entire populations to surrender without resistance, their will to fight crushed by the certainty that their efforts would ultimately prove futile. Mephet'ran the Deceiver represented the antithesis of the Nightbringer's straightforward approach to destruction, embodying instead the power of misdirection, manipulation, and the corruption of truth itself. This Catan entity had originally fed upon the complex electromagnetic patterns generated by binary star systems, where the gravitational interactions between multiple stellar bodies created intricate energy flows that required sophisticated analysis to understand. The Deceiver's consciousness had evolved to appreciate the subtle relationships between cause and effect, developing an ability to perceive the hidden connections that linked seemingly unrelated events across vast spans of time and space. The Deceiver's physical manifestation deliberately eschewed the intimidating presence favored by other Catan entities, instead adopting forms that appeared deceptively benign or even attractive to potential victims. The entity's necrodermis body could reshape itself to mimic the appearance of various species, though it typically maintained a humanoid configuration approximately 4 meters in height. Its features possessed an unsettling perfection that seemed almost organic despite their metallic composition, with facial expressions that could convey warmth, concern, or trustworthiness with disturbing authenticity. The entity's mastery of deception extended far beyond simple shape-changing abilities. The Deceiver could manipulate electromagnetic fields to create false sensory impressions, generating phantom images, sounds, and even tactile sensations that were indistinguishable from reality to most detection methods. These illusions could be maintained across multiple star systems simultaneously, allowing the entity to conduct elaborate schemes that span centuries while appearing to be in dozens of locations at once. The Deceiver's false manifestations possessed enough apparent substance to interact with physical objects and engage in complex conversations, making it nearly impossible for victims to distinguish between genuine encounters and elaborate deceptions. The Deceiver's strategic approach to warfare involved the systematic corruption of information networks and communication systems that enemy civilizations depended upon for coordination. The entity would infiltrate command structures by impersonating key leaders, issuing contradictory orders that created confusion and internal conflict within opposing forces. These operations were conducted with such subtlety that the targeted organizations often destroyed themselves through internal strife without ever realizing they had been manipulated by an external agent. During the War in Heaven, the Deceiver demonstrated a particular talent for turning allied species against each other through carefully orchestrated provocations and false flag operations. The entity would arrange incidents that appeared to show one faction attacking another, providing fabricated evidence that supported whatever narrative would create the most destructive internal conflicts. Entire alliance networks that had stood firm against Catan expansion for millennia would suddenly collapse into civil war as member species turned on each other based on the Deceiver's manufactured intelligence. The Deceiver's relationship with its Necron servants differed significantly from the straightforward domination exercised by other Catan entities. Rather than simply commanding obedience through superior power, the Deceiver would convince its followers that their orders served their own interests or aligned with their personal goals. Necron nobles under the Deceiver's influence often believed they were pursuing independent agendas when they were actually implementing the entity's long-term strategies. This approach created a network of willing collaborators who served the Deceiver's purposes with enthusiasm rather than reluctant compliance. Magladroth the Void Dragon stood apart from its fellow Catan entities through its fundamental association with technology and the principles that govern the interaction between energy and matter. During its primordial existence, this entity had fed upon the exotic radiations generated by stellar forges, where heavy elements were created through nuclear fusion processes. The Void Dragon's consciousness had developed an intuitive understanding of atomic structures and the forces that bound matter together, making it the most technically sophisticated of all the star gods. The Void Dragon's physical manifestation reflected its technological nature, appearing as a massive draconic form constructed from living metal that constantly shifted and reconfigured itself according to functional requirements. The entity's body measured over 50 meters from snout to tail, with wings that could extend to span nearly twice that distance when fully deployed. Its hide consisted of overlapping plates of necrodermis that could rearrange themselves to form complex mechanical devices or weapon systems as needed. The Void Dragon's head resembled a fusion of organic and mechanical elements, with multiple optical sensors that could perceive across vast spectrums of electromagnetic radiation and detect the molecular composition of materials at considerable distances. The entity's most distinctive characteristic was its ability to interface directly with technological systems, regardless of their origin or complexity. The Void Dragon could establish control over mechanical devices simply by focusing its attention upon them, overriding their original programming and integrating them into its own operational matrix. This capability extended to both simple tools and sophisticated artificial intelligences, making the entity capable of commandeering entire fleets or industrial complexes within moments of establishing contact. The Void Dragon's influence on technological development throughout the galaxy represented perhaps the most subtle but far-reaching impact of any Catan entity. The being's presence seemed to accelerate innovation and discovery among species that came within its sphere of influence, inspiring breakthroughs in engineering and applied sciences that might otherwise have taken millennia to achieve. However, these technological advances invariably incorporated design principles that served the Void Dragon's ultimate purposes, creating dependencies and vulnerabilities that the entity could exploit when circumstances required. The most persistent theories regarding the Void Dragon's current status suggest that this Catan entity was not successfully sharded like its contemporaries, but instead was imprisoned intact beneath the surface of Mars during the final phases of the war in heaven. Proponents of this theory point to the remarkable technological development that characterized human civilization during the Dark Age of technology, arguing that such rapid advancement could only be explained by external influence from a being with intimate knowledge of advanced engineering principles. The Adeptus Mechanicus of the 41st millennium unknowingly provides circumstantial evidence for the Void Dragon's presence on Mars through their reverence for the Omnissiah, a machine god whose characteristics bear disturbing similarities to Catan entities. The tech priest's obsession with replacing organic components with mechanical augmentations mirrors the biotransference process that created the Necrons, while their belief that knowledge and consciousness can be perfectly preserved in digital form echoes the promises that the Catan made to the ancient Necrontyr. Iash'uddra the Endless Swarm represented the Catan's exploration of collective consciousness and distributed intelligence, embodying principles that would later be imperfectly mimicked by various hive mind species throughout the galaxy. This entity had originally existed as a network of smaller energy patterns that functioned as a single coordinated intelligence, feeding upon the complex gravitational interactions generated by globular clusters, where thousands of stars existed in close proximity to each other. The Endless Swarm's approach to physical manifestation differed radically from other Catan entities, as it chose to distribute its consciousness across multiple smaller forms rather than concentrating its power within a single massive body. These subsidiary manifestations, typically measured between 2 and 5 meters in height, resembling humanoid figures constructed from necrodermis that flowed like liquid metal while maintaining structural integrity. Each individual form possessed sufficient intelligence to operate independently while remaining connected to the collective consciousness that coordinated their activities across multiple star systems. The entity's tactical capabilities stemmed from its ability to coordinate vast numbers of separate units with perfect synchronization. Iash'uddra could deploy thousands of manifestations simultaneously, each one aware of the activities and status of all others within the network. This distributed intelligence allowed the Endless Swarm to conduct complex operations that required precise timing across galactic distances, with individual units executing their assigned roles without the communication delays that would cripple conventional military organizations. The Endless Swarm's influence extended beyond its direct manifestations to encompass various forms of artificial intelligence and automated systems that served as extensions of its consciousness. The entity could establish control over manufacturing facilities, defense networks, and transportation systems, integrating them into its operational matrix and using them to support its primary manifestations. This capability made Iash'uddra particularly effective at conducting siege operations, as it could simultaneously attack enemy positions while corrupting the automated systems that defenders relied upon for logistics and communication. During the War in Heaven, the Endless Swarm demonstrated the ability to rapidly adapt its tactics and capabilities in response to changing battlefield conditions. The entity would analyze enemy countermeasures and implement modifications to its manifestations within hours rather than the extended timeframes required by organic militaries. This adaptability made Iash'uddra one of the most dangerous Catan entities to face in prolonged campaigns, as conventional strategies became ineffective once the entity had sufficient time to develop appropriate responses. The fragmentation of Iash'uddra during the Catan Rebellion created a unique situation among the sharded star gods. Rather than producing individual shards with diminished capabilities, the process appears to have created multiple smaller collective intelligences that retain the entity's distributed consciousness principles. These shard networks continue to pose significant threats when encountered, as they can coordinate their activities across vast distances and rapidly adapt to new situations through shared learning experiences. The influence of these four named Catan entities extended far beyond their direct actions during the War in Heaven, shaping the fundamental character of galactic civilization in ways that persist into the 41st millennium. Their archetypal natures became embedded in the collective unconscious of countless species, manifesting as universal fears and aspirations that transcend individual cultures or evolutionary backgrounds. The Nightbringer's association with death, the Deceiver's mastery of manipulation, the Void Dragon's technological prowess, and the Endless Swarm's collective intelligence represent fundamental aspects of existence that continue to influence galactic events despite their creators' imprisonment. The shards of these entities that remain active in the current era retain enough of their original personalities and capabilities to pose significant threats to any faction that encounters them. Imperial records document numerous incidents where Catan shards have been accidentally released from Necron tomb complexes, resulting in catastrophic damage before the fragments could be contained or destroyed. The Ordo Xenos maintains extensive files on Catan shard encounters, though much of this information remains classified due to the psychological impact that detailed knowledge of these entities tends to have on human populations. Beyond the four great named entities that dominated Catan hierarchy during the War in Heaven, dozens of lesser star gods wielded powers that could reshape entire sectors of the galaxy. These beings, while lacking the cosmic significance of their more prominent brethren, possessed unique characteristics that made them formidable adversaries and valuable assets to the Necron dynasties that eventually enslaved them. Their individual specializations reflected the diverse feeding patterns and evolutionary paths that Catan consciousness had followed during the primordial epochs when they drifted through the void as pure energy. Nyadra'zatha the Burning One represented the most volatile and destructive of the lesser Khatan entities, its consciousness forged in the nuclear furnaces of stellar cores during their most violent phases. This entity had originally fed upon the exotic particles released during stellar flares and coronal mass ejections, developing an intimate understanding of the fusion processes that powered stars and the catastrophic events that could cause them to explode. The Burning One's energy form had been drawn to unstable proto-stars and variable stars, whose erratic behavior provided the intense, chaotic energy signatures that sustained its particular form of existence. The entity's physical manifestation during the war in heaven took the form of a humanoid figure approximately 20 meters in height, its necrodermis body constantly radiating heat that could melt conventional metals at considerable distances. The Burning One's surface temperature fluctuated wildly, sometimes reaching levels that approached those found in stellar cores before cooling to merely white-hot levels that still made direct observation impossible without specialized protective equipment. Its form appeared to be constructed from living flame, contained within a skeletal framework of superheated metal, with energy patterns that resembled solar prominences arcing between its limbs and torso. Nyadra'zatha's most terrifying capability lay in its ability to ignite stellar fusion reactions within previously stable matter. The entity could focus its attention on planetary atmospheres, causing the hydrogen content to undergo spontaneous fusion that would transform entire worlds into miniature stars within hours. These artificial stellar ignitions produced energy releases that could be detected across multiple star systems, serving as both weapons of mass destruction and signals that announced the Burning One's presence to any civilization capable of monitoring stellar phenomena. The tactical applications of stellar ignition made Nyadra'zatha one of the most feared Khatan entities among the Old One's client species. The mere threat of the Burning One's presence in a star system could force the evacuation of entire sectors, as no defensive technology existed that could protect against the conversion of planetary atmospheres into fusion reactors. The entity's attacks left behind dead systems, where the remnants of destroyed worlds continued to burn with artificial stellar fires that would persist for millions of years. The psychological impact of witnessing the Burning One's handiwork extended far beyond the immediate destruction it caused. Survivors of systems that had experienced stellar ignition reported that the sight of artificial stars burning where planets had once existed created lasting trauma that affected entire generations. The knowledge that matter itself could be transformed into stellar fire challenged fundamental assumptions about the stability of physical reality, leading to widespread panic and the collapse of interstellar trade networks as species became reluctant to travel between systems that might harbor such threats. During the Khatan Rebellion, the effort to contain Nyadra'zatha required specialized tesseract labyrinths designed to channel and dissipate the enormous thermal energies the entity generated. The Necron forces assigned to this task suffered catastrophic casualties, as their living metal forms proved insufficient protection against the temperatures the Burning One could generate when cornered. The successful sharding of this entity required the sacrifice of an entire tomb world, whose population was incinerated during the final phase of the containment operation. The shards of Nyadra'zatha that survived the fragmentation process retain the entity's fundamental association with stellar fire and nuclear fusion. These fragments, when encountered in the 41st millennium, demonstrate the ability to trigger localized fusion reactions that can devastate Imperial Guard regiments or Space Marine companies within seconds. The Ordo Xenos has classified these shards as extremis-level threats requiring immediate termination through orbital bombardment, as conventional ground forces lack the equipment necessary to survive extended exposure to their thermal emissions. Llandu'gor the Flayer occupied a unique position among the Khatan entities due to its fundamental association with biological processes and the consumption of organic matter. Unlike its brethren who fed primarily upon stellar energies or electromagnetic phenomena, the Flayer had developed an appetite for the life essence contained within living tissue. This entity's original energy form had been drawn to worlds where complex organic chemistry was taking place, feeding upon the bioelectric fields generated by primitive life forms and the chemical energy released during cellular metabolism. The Flayer's physical manifestation resembled a grotesque fusion of organic and mechanical elements, standing approximately 15 meters tall with limbs that terminated in razor-sharp talons, capable of flensing flesh from bone with surgical precision. Its necrodermis body incorporated organic-looking textures and patterns that created the disturbing impression of living tissue stretched over a mechanical skeleton. The entity's head featured multiple sensory organs that could detect the presence of organic matter across vast distances, while its mouth contained rows of metallic teeth designed for efficiently processing biological material. Llandu'gor's feeding habits during the War in Heaven involved the systematic harvesting of organic beings from conquered worlds, with the entity demonstrating a preference for sentient species whose complex neural activity provided richer sources of bioelectric energy. The Flayer would establish processing facilities on captured planets where living beings were kept in specialized containment systems that maximized their fear and suffering while preserving their biological functions. These installations produced a steady stream of refined life essence that the entity consumed while using the processed organic matter to create grotesque sculptures and architectural elements. The entity's most disturbing characteristic was its ability to appreciate and manipulate the aesthetic qualities of organic forms. Llandu'gor would arrange the remains of its victims in elaborate patterns that demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of biological symmetry and proportion. These displays served no apparent tactical purpose, but seemed to provide the entity with a form of artistic satisfaction that distinguished it from other Khatan beings. The Flayer's installations became galleries of organic horror, where the boundaries between art and atrocity were completely obliterated. The psychological warfare applications of the Flayer's activities proved devastatingly effective against species that valued individual life and bodily integrity. The discovery of Llandu'gor's processing facilities could break the morale of entire military formations, as soldiers confronted evidence of the systematic degradation that awaited capture. The entity's reputation for creative cruelty spread throughout the galaxy, creating terror that often proved more effective than direct military action in securing the surrender of enemy forces. The destruction of Llandu'gor during the Khatan Rebellion created consequences that would plague the Necron dynasties for millions of years. The entity's final moments released a psychic emanation that infected nearby Necron warriors with what would become known as the Flayer virus, a form of madness that compelled the affected individuals to engage in the same ritualistic consumption of organic matter that had characterized their former master. This infection proved capable of spreading through Necron communication networks, creating isolated outbreaks of cannibalistic behavior that persisted long after the Flayer's destruction. The Flayer virus represents one of the most persistent threats to Necron society, as infected individuals retain their mechanical capabilities while being driven by an insatiable hunger for organic flesh. These flayed ones, as they are known, are typically exiled from their dynasties and forced to exist as outcasts who prey upon organic species throughout the galaxy. The virus appears to be incurable through conventional means, suggesting that Llandu'gor's influence continues to affect the Necron race despite the entity's fragmentation. Tsara'noga the Outsider achieved infamy among the Khatan entities through actions that even its fellow star gods found disturbing. This being had originally existed as a relatively minor entity that fed upon the gravitational anomalies generated by binary star systems and stellar clusters. The Outsider's consciousness had developed along paths that emphasized curiosity and experimentation, leading it to investigate phenomena that other Khatan entities ignored as irrelevant to their feeding requirements. The transformation of Tsara'noga into the mad entity known as the Outsider began during the early phases of the War in Heaven, when the entity began experimenting with the consumption of other Khatan beings. This cannibalistic behavior was unprecedented among the star gods, who had previously shown no interest in consuming members of their own species. The Outsider's initial experiments involved attacking and devouring minor Khatan entities whose power levels were significantly below its own, apparently driven by curiosity about whether such consumption would enhance its capabilities. The results of these cannibalistic experiments proved catastrophic for the Outsider's mental stability. Each consumed Khatan entity added its consciousness to Tsara'noga's own, creating a chaotic mixture of conflicting personalities and memories that gradually overwhelmed the entity's original identity. The Outsider began to exhibit erratic behavior patterns that made it unreliable as an ally and dangerous to both enemies and fellow Khatan entities. Its actions became increasingly unpredictable as the consumed consciousnesses asserted themselves at random intervals, creating a fractured personality that could shift between different behavioral patterns without warning. The physical manifestation of the Outsider reflected its fractured mental state, appearing as a constantly shifting amalgamation of forms that incorporated elements from all the Khatan entities it had consumed. The being's necrodermis body would spontaneously reconfigure itself, sometimes displaying characteristics associated with the Nightbringer's death aspect, then shifting to exhibit the Deceiver's shape-changing abilities, before adopting entirely new configurations that seemed to represent the consumed entity's original forms. This constant metamorphosis made the Outsider impossible to predict or counter through conventional tactical analysis. The Outsider's madness manifested in increasingly destructive ways as the war in heaven progressed. The entity would attack both allied and enemy forces without discrimination, its fractured consciousness unable to maintain consistent strategic objectives. Necron forces under the Outsider's nominal command found themselves receiving contradictory orders that reflected the different personalities competing for control of the entity's actions. These internal conflicts often resulted in Necron units being ordered to attack each other or to pursue objectives that served no apparent tactical purpose. The other Khatan entities eventually recognized that the Outsider posed a threat to their own existence, as Tsara'noga's cannibalistic tendencies showed no signs of diminishing despite the obvious negative effects on its mental stability. The entity's hunger for Khatan essence had grown with each consumption, driving it to attempt attacks on increasingly powerful targets. The Nightbringer and the Deceiver collaborated in an unprecedented alliance to contain the Outsider's threat, recognizing that their own survival might depend on preventing further cannibalistic incidents. The solution implemented by the other Khatan entities involved the construction of a massive Dyson sphere in the intergalactic void, far beyond the boundaries of the galaxy, where the Outsider's madness could pose no threat to the ongoing war effort. This artificial construct incorporated technologies that exceeded even normal Khatan capabilities, creating a prison that could contain an entity of the Outsider's power, while providing sufficient space for its fractured consciousness to exist without external interference. The banishment of Tsara'noga to the Dyson Sphere prison marked the end of its direct participation in galactic events, though the entity's influence continued to manifest through the psychological trauma its actions had inflicted on other Khatan beings. The knowledge that their own kind could be consumed, and that such consumption led to madness created unprecedented fear among entities that had previously considered themselves invulnerable to any form of permanent harm. The nature of Khatan consciousness fragmentation, as revealed through the sharding process implemented during the Necron Rebellion, demonstrated that these entities' awareness operated according to principles that differed fundamentally from organic intelligence. Rather than existing as unified streams of thought and memory, Khatan consciousness appeared to consist of discrete information packets that could be separated and recombined without losing their essential characteristics. This modular structure explained how the Tesseract labyrinths could fragment star god awareness while preserving functional intelligence within individual shards. Each Khatan shard retained specific aspects of its parent entity's personality and capabilities, though the relationship between shard size and retained power proved more complex than simple proportional reduction. Some small shards demonstrated abilities that seemed disproportionately powerful compared to their apparent energy content, while larger fragments occasionally exhibited limitations that suggested important elements of the original consciousness had been lost during the fragmentation process. This unpredictability made individual shards difficult to assess and contain, as their capabilities could not be reliably predicted based on their apparent size or energy signatures. The retention of personality characteristics within C'tan shards created ongoing security challenges for the Necron dynasties responsible for their containment. Shards derived from the Deceiver continued to attempt elaborate escape schemes that exploited weaknesses in their prison systems, while Nightbringer fragments emanated auras of despair that could affect even soulless Necron guards. The most dangerous shards retained enough coherent memory to harbor grudges against specific dynasties or individuals, creating personal vendettas that could persist across millions of years of imprisonment. The study of C'tan shard behavior revealed that these fragments retain the ability to communicate with each other across vast distances, though the mechanisms underlying this communication remained poorly understood even by Necron scientists. Shards from the same parent entity seemed capable of sharing information and coordinating their activities despite being imprisoned in separate facilities on different worlds. This networking capability suggested that C'tan consciousness fragmentation might not be as complete as the Necron rebels had originally believed, raising concerns about the possibility of eventual reconstitution if sufficient shards were ever brought together. The diminishment of power that accompanied C'tan fragmentation affected different aspects of their capabilities in varying degrees. Physical manifestation abilities typically showed the most dramatic reduction, with shards requiring external energy sources to maintain stable forms for extended periods. Specialized powers related to each entity's original nature proved more resilient to fragmentation, with even small shards retaining significant capabilities in their areas of expertise. This selective preservation of abilities made it possible for minor shards to pose threats that exceeded their apparent power levels when operating within their specialized domains. The psychological impact of fragmentation on C'tan consciousness remained a subject of intense study among those Necron scientists with sufficient security clearance to access imprisoned shards. Interviews with coherent fragments revealed that the sharding process had created a form of existential horror that transcended physical pain or conventional suffering. The shards retained awareness of their diminished state and memories of their former power, creating a form of psychological torment that seemed to intensify rather than diminish over time. This ongoing anguish manifested as rage and hatred that could influence the behavior of organic beings who came into contact with the imprisoned fragments. The current status of C'tan shards across the galaxy represents one of the most closely guarded secrets within Necron society, with each dynasty maintaining elaborate protocols to prevent the catastrophic release of their imprisoned star god fragments. Within the deepest vaults of tomb worlds, and aboard the most heavily shielded tomb ships, thousands of tesseract labyrinths containing C'tan shards lie dormant, their multi-dimensional prisons requiring constant energy expenditure to maintain their dimensional locks. The power requirements for these containment systems are staggering, with some of the larger shards demanding energy outputs equivalent to entire planetary power grids simply to prevent their escape from folded space-time. The Tesseract labyrinths themselves have evolved considerably since their original construction during the War in Heaven, incorporating millions of years of refinement and technological advancement. Modern containment systems feature recursive dimensional folding that creates prison spaces exponentially larger than their external dimensions, allowing even the most powerful shards sufficient room to manifest without approaching the boundaries of their confinement. The labyrinthine structures within these pocket dimensions shift and reconfigure constantly, preventing imprisoned shards from mapping their surroundings or identifying potential weaknesses in the containment matrix. Each Tesseract labyrinth incorporates multiple layers of security designed to prevent both escape and unauthorized access. Quantum locks require specific authorization codes that change according to algorithms known only to the highest-ranking Necron nobles, while temporal stasis fields can be activated to freeze imprisoned shards in temporal loops that prevent them from accumulating energy for escape attempts. The most sophisticated containment systems include psychic dampening fields that interfere with the shard's ability to influence organic minds, though these measures prove less effective against shards that retain significant portions of their original consciousness. The physical storage of tesseract labyrinths within Necron facilities follows strict protocols that minimize the risk of accidental activation or shard interaction. Containment vaults are typically located in the deepest levels of tomb complexes, surrounded by multiple layers of necrodermis armor and energy shields that can withstand direct hits from Nova cannons. The vaults themselves are arranged to prevent line-of-sight contact between different labyrinths, as some shards have demonstrated the ability to communicate through direct observation even while imprisoned. Temperature regulation within storage facilities requires constant monitoring, as certain shards generate thermal signatures that can affect nearby containment systems. Shards derived from the Burning One produce heat that can damage adjacent tesseract labyrinths if not properly managed, while fragments of the Nightbringer create zones of absolute cold that can cause structural failures in standard necrodermis components. Environmental control systems must account for these extreme conditions while maintaining the precise atmospheric compositions required for optimal containment field stability. The hierarchical access protocols governing Khatan shard containment reflect the extreme caution that Necron society has developed regarding these imprisoned entities. Only overlords of sufficient rank and proven loyalty are granted knowledge of shard locations, with access codes distributed among multiple individuals to prevent any single noble from independently releasing imprisoned fragments. The Silent King's direct descendants maintain ultimate authority over the most powerful shards, though even they must follow elaborate verification procedures before accessing high-priority containment facilities. Necron tomb ships carrying Khatan shards implement additional security measures designed to prevent shard release during combat operations or system failures. Emergency protocols can jettison entire containment sections into the void of space if ship integrity is compromised, while backup power systems ensure that tesseract labyrinths remain active even if primary generators are destroyed. The most valuable shards are transported in dedicated vessels whose sole purpose is containment security, with minimal crew complements to reduce the risk of internal sabotage or corruption. The careful rotation of guard duties around Khatan containment facilities prevents individual Necrons from developing unhealthy fascination with imprisoned shards. Extended exposure to certain fragments can cause behavioral modifications even in soulless mechanical beings, with guards sometimes developing obsessive behaviors that mirror their assigned shard's original nature. Warriors assigned to guard deceiver fragments may begin exhibiting increased deceptiveness in their interactions with fellow Necrons, while those watching Nightbringer shards often develop fatalistic attitudes that can compromise their effectiveness in other duties. Regular inspection protocols require detailed analysis of containment system integrity and shard behavior patterns. Necron cryptechs specializing in dimensional manipulation conduct monthly evaluations of tesseract labyrinth stability, checking for signs of dimensional decay or unauthorized modifications that might indicate escape attempts. These inspections often reveal evidence of shard activities within their prisons, including attempts to modify the labyrinthine structures or establish communication with external entities through quantum entanglement effects. The deployment of Khatan shards as weapons represents the ultimate expression of Necron military capability, though such actions require authorization from the highest levels of dynasty leadership. The process begins with careful selection of appropriate shards based on tactical requirements and enemy characteristics, as different fragments possess varying degrees of effectiveness against specific targets. Shards derived from the Void Dragon prove particularly effective against technologically advanced enemies, while Nightbringer fragments excel at breaking enemy morale through their death-aspected emanations. Preparation for shard deployment involves extensive modifications to Tesseract labyrinths that allow controlled release of imprisoned entities while maintaining sufficient containment to prevent complete escape. These modified prisons function as weapons platforms that can channel shard abilities toward designated targets while keeping the fragments themselves under Necron control. The engineering challenges involved in creating these weapon systems require the combined expertise of multiple cryptech conclaves working in perfect coordination. The activation sequence for Catan shard weapons follows protocols designed to minimize the risk of containment failure during combat operations. Multiple redundant control systems ensure that shard release remains limited to specific parameters, while emergency termination procedures can instantly return fragments to full containment if they begin exhibiting uncontrolled behavior. The weapon's operators, typically high-ranking Lich Guards with specialized training, maintain constant monitoring of shard activity levels and containment field integrity throughout deployment. Recent conflicts have witnessed several notable instances of Catan shard deployment against Imperial forces, each demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of these weapons when properly employed. During the Damnos incident, Necron forces under Overlord Zondrak deployed a Nightbringer shard against advancing Ultramarines companies, causing mass casualties as Space Marines experienced accelerated aging that reduced their enhanced physiology to dust within minutes. The psychological impact of witnessing their battle brothers crumble to nothing proved as devastating as the physical casualties, with surviving Marines reporting persistent nightmares and difficulty maintaining combat effectiveness in subsequent engagements. The siege of Mordian Iron Guard Fortress World Mordian Prime saw the deployment of a Deceiver shard that infiltrated Imperial command structures by impersonating high-ranking officers. The fragment spent months issuing contradictory orders and spreading false intelligence that gradually undermined the planet's defensive coordination. When Necron ground forces finally launched their assault, they encountered minimal resistance as Imperial Guard regiments had been maneuvered into disadvantageous positions or convinced to abandon critical defensive installations based on fabricated evacuation orders. The most catastrophic recorded instance of Catan shard deployment occurred during the Orpheus Sector campaign, where multiple Necron dynasties coordinated the simultaneous release of several powerful fragments against Imperial Navy battle fleets. A Void Dragon shard demonstrated its technological mastery by seizing control of entire Imperial vessels, turning their weapons against their own fleet mates while their crews remained helpless to prevent the hijacking of their ship's machine spirits. The resulting fratricidal battle eliminated 3 full battle groups before surviving Imperial forces could retreat beyond the shard's influence range. The Burning One shard released during the Vaccinide system cleansing transformed 2 inhabited worlds into artificial stars through the ignition of their atmospheric hydrogen content. The process began with localized fusion reactions in the upper atmosphere that gradually expanded until entire continents were consumed by stellar fire. Imperial evacuation efforts proved futile as the fusion reactions spread faster than transport vessels could extract civilian populations, resulting in the deaths of over 14 billion Imperial citizens within a single solar day. These deployment incidents have prompted significant changes in Imperial military doctrine regarding Necron encounters, with the Adeptus Munitorum issuing classified directives on identifying potential Catan shard presence and implementing appropriate countermeasures. Imperial Guard commanders are now trained to recognize the distinctive energy signatures that accompany shard manifestation, while Space Marine chapters maintain specialized equipment designed to detect dimensional anomalies that might indicate Tesseract labyrinth activity. The Adeptus Mechanicus has developed particular expertise in countering Void Dragon shard deployments, having experienced numerous incidents where their technological systems fell under external control during Necron encounters. Tech priests now employ blessed machine spirits specifically consecrated to resist foreign influence, while critical systems incorporate manual override capabilities that can function independently of digital control networks. These measures have proven partially effective, though Void Dragon shards continue to demonstrate the ability to subvert even heavily protected Imperial technology. The ongoing risk of shard coalescence represents the greatest long-term threat posed by imprisoned Catan fragments, as the potential reunification of multiple shards from the same parent entity could recreate beings approaching the power levels of the original star gods. Necron scientists have identified several mechanisms through which shard coalescence might occur, including direct physical contact between fragments, synchronized activation of multiple tesseract labyrinths, or the accumulation of sufficient energy by individual shards to overcome their dimensional barriers. The mathematical models developed by Necron cryptechs suggest that the reunification of as few as 12 major shards from the same Catan entity could produce a being capable of independent existence outside tesseract labyrinth containment. Such an entity would retain most of its original personality and capabilities, while harboring intense hatred toward the Necron dynasties responsible for its fragmentation and imprisonment. The potential for revenge-driven behavior makes shard coalescence scenarios particularly dangerous, as reconstituted Catan entities would likely prioritize the destruction of their former captors over any other strategic objectives. The distribution of shards across multiple dynasties and tomb worlds serves as the primary defense against accidental coalescence, ensuring that no single location contains sufficient fragments to enable reunification. However, this distribution creates its own risks, as the loss of communication between dynasties or the corruption of individual overlords could result in unauthorized shard transfers or trading agreements that inadvertently concentrate dangerous numbers of compatible fragments. The recent awakening of numerous tomb worlds following millennia of dormancy has complicated shard security protocols, as many dynasties have discovered that their containment systems suffered degradation during the Great Sleep. Some tesseract labyrinths have experienced partial failures that allowed imprisoned shards to influence their surrounding environments, while others show signs of unauthorized modification that suggest the fragments have been actively working to compromise their prisons over geological timescales. The Maynarch dynasty's catastrophic awakening serves as a cautionary example of what can occur when shard containment protocols fail completely. Multiple tesseract labyrinths within their primary tomb complex suffered simultaneous failures that released dozens of imprisoned fragments into the tomb's internal systems. The resulting chaos saw Catan shards possessing Necron warriors and turning them against their own dynasty, while others began the process of rebuilding physical manifestation bodies from available necrodermis resources. Only the intervention of the Silent King's personal forces prevented a complete shard breakout that could have threatened the entire sector. The psychological warfare applications of Catan shards extend beyond their direct combat capabilities, as the mere knowledge of their existence can influence enemy behavior in ways that serve Necron's strategic objectives. Imperial forces that suspect the presence of Catan shards often exhibit increased caution and reduced aggression, as commanders recognize that conventional tactics prove ineffective against such entities. This hesitation provides Necron forces with tactical advantages that can prove decisive in prolonged campaigns. The study of shard behavior patterns has revealed that imprisoned fragments retain significant portions of their original consciousness and memory, including detailed knowledge of galactic history and the locations of various strategic resources. Some dynasties have attempted to extract information from cooperative shards, though such interactions carry enormous risks, as the fragments invariably seek to manipulate their interrogators toward actions that might facilitate their escape or the release of other imprisoned entities. The development of specialized containment technologies continues to occupy significant resources within Necron society, as the constant arms race between shard escape attempts and security improvements demands continuous innovation. Recent advances include quantum entanglement locks that prevent shards from communicating with external entities and temporal displacement fields that can shift tesseract labyrinths slightly out of phase with normal space-time to prevent physical interaction with their surroundings. The fundamental nature of Catan power transcends conventional understanding of physics and reality, operating through principles that predate the current universe's physical laws. These entities possess the ability to manipulate matter at the subatomic level, restructuring atomic bonds and molecular arrangements through direct application of will rather than technological intervention. A Catan shard can transform solid rock into liquid mercury, convert atmospheric gases into precious metals, or restructure the crystalline matrix of diamonds into common carbon dust within seconds of focusing its attention on the target material. The process of matter transmutation occurs through the Catan's innate understanding of quantum mechanics and electromagnetic forces that bind atoms together. Unlike human technology that requires complex machinery and enormous energy expenditure to achieve similar results, Catan entities simply impose their will upon matter's fundamental structure, overriding the natural forces that maintain atomic stability. This capability extends beyond simple elemental conversion to include the creation of entirely new materials with properties that violate conventional physics, such as metals that remain liquid at absolute zero or gases that exhibit solid-state density while maintaining gaseous behavior. The scale of matter manipulation varies significantly between different Catan entities and their individual shards. The most powerful fragments can restructure entire planetary surfaces, transforming barren worlds into crystalline formations that serve as massive focusing arrays for their other abilities. Lesser shards typically limit their transmutation activities to smaller areas, though even minor fragments can convert several cubic kilometers of material within hours of sustained effort. The energy requirements for these transformations appear negligible from the Catan perspective, suggesting that their manipulation of matter operates through principles that bypass thermodynamic limitations. Dimensional folding represents perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Catan's spatial manipulation, as these entities can alter the fundamental geometry of three-dimensional space to create impossible architectural structures. A Catan shard can compress vast distances into small areas, creating corridors that appear to stretch for meters, but actually span light years, or expand tiny chambers into cavernous spaces that could contain entire cities. These dimensional modifications remain stable indefinitely once established, creating permanent alterations to local space-time that persist even after the Catan responsible has been destroyed or contained. The tactical applications of dimensional folding provide Catan entities with enormous advantages in both defensive and offensive operations. They can create maze-like structures where enemy forces become lost in corridors that loop back on themselves or lead to destinations completely unrelated to their apparent direction. Defensive positions can be established in folded space that appears vulnerable from external observation, but actually contains multiple layers of overlapping dimensional barriers that make conventional assault impossible. The ability to rewrite physical laws within localized areas grants Catan entities godlike control over their immediate environment, allowing them to create zones where gravity operates in reverse, electromagnetic forces repel rather than attract, or thermodynamic laws permit the creation of energy from nothing. These reality alterations typically extend for several kilometers around the Catan's physical manifestation, though particularly powerful entities can influence areas spanning entire continents. The modified physics remain in effect as long as the Catan maintains active concentration on the alterations, reverting to normal universal constants once the entity's attention shifts elsewhere. Within these zones of altered reality, conventional weapons and technologies often cease to function as expected. La's weapons may fire beams of solid matter instead of coherent light, while bolter rounds might transform into harmless flower petals mid-flight. Vehicles can find their engines producing gravitational fields instead of mechanical thrust, while communication devices begin transmitting across temporal rather than spatial dimensions. These effects make it nearly impossible for enemy forces to maintain effective resistance once they enter areas under C'tan reality manipulation. The temporal manipulation capabilities possessed by C'tan entities operate on principles that remain poorly understood even by the most advanced Necron scientists. These beings can create localized distortions in the flow of time that cause events within affected areas to occur at dramatically different rates compared to the surrounding universe. A C'tan shard might accelerate time within a small region to age enemy soldiers decades within minutes, or slow temporal flow to near stasis levels that effectively freeze attacking forces in place, while the entity repositions itself for optimal tactical advantage. The precision of C'tan temporal manipulation allows for surgical applications that can affect individual targets while leaving nearby objects unaltered. An entity might accelerate the aging process of a specific enemy commander while leaving his bodyguards completely unaffected, or create temporal bubbles around critical equipment that prevent it from functioning while allowing organic operators to move freely. This selective application of temporal distortion makes it extremely difficult for enemy forces to develop effective countermeasures or predict the scope of potential effects. Limited precognitive abilities enable C'tan entities to perceive potential future events as probability matrices rather than fixed outcomes. This foresight operates through their fundamental connection to the universe's underlying mathematical structure, allowing them to calculate the likely results of current actions and trends across multiple temporal scales. A C'tan shard can predict the movement patterns of enemy forces hours or days in advance, anticipate the failure of specific mechanical systems, or foresee the development of particular weather patterns that might affect ongoing operations. The accuracy of C'tan precognition varies depending on the complexity of the systems being observed and the temporal distance of the predictions. Short-term forecasts involving simple mechanical or physical processes achieve near-perfect accuracy, while longer-term predictions about complex organic behavior become increasingly uncertain as the number of variables multiplies. The entities seem unable to predict events involving significant warp influence or the actions of powerful psychers, suggesting that their precognitive abilities operate through purely material rather than psychic mechanisms. The most unsettling aspect of C'tan temporal manipulation involves their ability to exist partially outside linear time, experiencing past, present, and future as simultaneous phenomena rather than sequential events. This temporal displacement allows them to react to attacks before they are launched, respond to communications before they are sent, or begin defensive preparations for threats that have not yet materialized. Enemy forces facing C'tan entities often report the disturbing sensation that their opponents are responding to their thoughts and intentions rather than their actual actions. The energy projection capabilities of C'tan entities encompass a vast spectrum of destructive and manipulative effects that can influence targets across interplanetary distances. These beings can generate focused beams of stellar intensity heat that can melt through the heaviest armor or vaporize entire formations of enemy troops within seconds. The thermal energy they produce operates at temperatures that approach those found in stellar cores, creating plasma effects that can persist for hours after the initial discharge and continue causing damage to anything that enters the affected area. Gravitational manipulation represents one of the most tactically versatile C'tan abilities, allowing these entities to create artificial gravity wells that can crush enemy vehicles, generate repulsive fields that deflect incoming projectiles, or establish gravitational lenses that focus and redirect energy weapons. A C'tan shard can increase local gravitational forces to levels that prevent enemy infantry from moving effectively, or reverse gravitational polarity to send attacking forces flying into the void of space. These gravitational effects can be maintained across vast areas, creating battlefield conditions that favor Catan tactical preferences while severely hampering enemy mobility and coordination. The electromagnetic control exercised by Catan entities extends far beyond simple manipulation of electrical currents to include mastery over the entire electromagnetic spectrum. They can generate electromagnetic pulses that disable electronic equipment across entire continents, create focused radio transmissions that override enemy communication networks, or produce infrared emissions that blind thermal detection systems. More sophisticated applications include the generation of electromagnetic fields that can deflect energy weapons, create false sensor readings, or establish communication links that operate faster than light through quantum entanglement effects. The combination of different energy projection capabilities allows Catan entities to create devastating synergistic effects that exceed the sum of their individual components. An entity might simultaneously generate intense gravitational fields to compress enemy formations while producing electromagnetic interference that prevents coordination and thermal emissions that cause widespread casualties. These combined attacks prove nearly impossible to defend against using conventional military doctrine, as the multiple simultaneous effects overwhelm defensive systems designed to counter single-vector threats. The psychic immunity possessed by Catan entities stems from their fundamental nature as beings of pure physical reality rather than creatures connected to the warp's immaterial dimensions. This immunity operates as a complete absence of psychic presence rather than active resistance to mental influence, making Catan entities effectively invisible to any form of psychic detection or manipulation. Psykers attempting to locate Catan entities through psychic means find only empty void where the beings should register, as if the entities simply do not exist within the psychic spectrum of reality. The anti-warp properties of Catan nature extend beyond simple immunity to create active interference with psychic phenomena in their vicinity. The presence of a Catan entity creates a null zone effect that dampens or completely suppresses psychic abilities within several kilometers of their location. Psykers entering these areas find their powers severely reduced or entirely unavailable, while demon entities experience physical pain from proximity to Catan anti-warp emanations. These effects make Catan entities particularly valuable assets against chaos forces or other psychically dependent enemies. The immunity to chaos corruption that Catan entities possess operates through their complete disconnection from the emotional and spiritual dimensions that feed the chaos gods. Unlike organic beings whose souls can be influenced by demonic presence or corrupted through exposure to warp energies, Catan entities have no spiritual component that can be targeted by chaos influence. They remain completely unaffected by fear, despair, rage, or other emotional states that chaos entities use to establish psychological dominance over their victims. This resistance to chaos corruption makes Catan shards particularly effective weapons against demonic incursions, as they can operate within areas of heavy warp contamination without suffering the psychological or physical degradation that affects other forces. A Catan shard can walk through demon-infested areas that would drive human soldiers insane or cause space marines to succumb to chaos influence, maintaining perfect tactical effectiveness regardless of the level of warp corruption in their environment. The detection immunity that Catan entities possess against psychic surveillance creates significant intelligence advantages in military operations. Enemy psykers cannot track Catan movements through divination, predict their tactical decisions through precognitive abilities, or communicate information about their presence through telepathic networks. This psychic invisibility allows Catan entities to achieve complete tactical surprise even against enemies who possess sophisticated psychic intelligence gathering capabilities. The anti-warp field generated by Catan presence can be weaponized against psychically dependent enemies through careful tactical positioning. A Catan shard placed near enemy psyker concentrations can effectively neutralize their abilities while remaining completely immune to psychic retaliation. This capability proves particularly devastating against Eldar forces, whose tactical doctrine relies heavily on psychic coordination and Farseer guidance, or against Imperial Guard units that depend on astropath communication networks. The interaction between C'tan anti-warp properties and technological systems reveals interesting secondary effects that can be exploited for tactical advantage. Machine spirits and artificial intelligences operating near C'tan entities often exhibit improved performance and resistance to corruption, as the anti-warp field prevents demonic influence from affecting their programming. This effect makes C'tan shards valuable assets for protecting critical technological infrastructure from chaos corruption or psychic sabotage attempts. The long-term exposure of organic beings to C'tan anti-warp emanations produces subtle but significant changes in their psychological and physiological condition. Humans operating near C'tan entities for extended periods report improved mental clarity and resistance to fear or despair, though they also experience reduced creativity and emotional responsiveness. These effects suggest that the anti-warp field influences more than just psychic abilities, potentially affecting the fundamental connection between consciousness and the immaterial realm that characterizes organic life. The measurement and analysis of C'tan power levels requires specialized equipment and techniques that push Necron technology to its absolute limits. Standard energy detection systems prove inadequate for monitoring entities that operate through principles that transcend conventional physics, while attempts to quantify their reality manipulation abilities often produce readings that exceed instrument calibration ranges. The most sophisticated Necron analysis equipment can provide rough estimates of C'tan shard power levels, but the measurements remain approximate due to the fundamental incompatibility between C'tan abilities and conventional scientific methodology. The theoretical imprisonment of Magladroth beneath the surface of Mars represents one of the most significant and controversial aspects of C'tan lore, with implications that extend far beyond simple historical curiosity into the very foundations of the Imperium's technological capabilities. Unlike its fellow star gods, who were successfully sharded during the Great Necron Rebellion, compelling evidence suggests that the Void Dragon was captured intact and transported to the Red Planet during the final phases of the War in Heaven. The circumstances surrounding this imprisonment remain shrouded in mystery, though fragmentary records and circumstantial evidence point toward the involvement of a figure whose identity has become one of the galaxy's most closely guarded secrets. The most persistent theories regarding the Void Dragon's capture center on the actions of an ancient human psyker of extraordinary power, whose intervention during the war in Heaven's closing stages may have prevented the complete extinction of organic life in the galaxy. This individual, whose true identity remains concealed behind layers of historical obfuscation and deliberate misinformation, allegedly possessed the psychic strength necessary to bind a C'tan entity through pure force of will. The binding process would have required not only immense psychic power, but also intimate knowledge of C'tan nature and the specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited to overcome their reality-manipulating abilities. The selection of Mars as the Void Dragon's prison demonstrates strategic thinking that suggests long-term planning spanning millennia. The Red Planet's unique geological composition, including its high iron content and complex magnetic field interactions, creates natural barriers that complement artificial containment systems. The planet's relative proximity to Terra provides opportunities for monitoring and intervention if containment protocols begin to fail, while its harsh environment discourages casual exploration that might accidentally disturb the imprisoned entity. The extensive cave systems and underground chambers carved by ancient geological processes offer ideal locations for constructing containment facilities that remain hidden from surface observation. The construction of the Void Dragon's prison would have required technological capabilities that exceeded anything available to human civilization during the War in Heaven's conclusion. The containment systems necessary to hold a complete Catan entity intact rather than fragmenting it into manageable shards would have demanded innovations in dimensional manipulation, energy field generation, and quantum mechanics that approached the sophistication of Necron Tesseract labyrinths. The successful implementation of such advanced technology by a primitive human civilization suggests either external assistance or the application of psychic abilities that could substitute for technological solutions through direct manipulation of reality. The influence of the imprisoned void dragon on Mars' subsequent history becomes apparent through analysis of the planet's unusual technological development patterns. Archaeological evidence indicates that human settlements on Mars achieved remarkable advances in metallurgy, engineering, and energy manipulation within centuries of the war in Heaven's conclusion, despite lacking the scientific foundation that should have been necessary for such breakthroughs. These early Martian civilizations developed technologies that incorporated design principles strikingly similar to those later observed in Necron artifacts, suggesting direct or indirect exposure to Catan technological concepts. The most significant manifestation of void dragon influence occurred during humanity's dark age of technology, when human civilization achieved technological capabilities that rivaled those of the galaxy's most advanced species. The rapid pace of innovation during this period defies conventional explanations for technological development, as human scientists made breakthrough discoveries in fields ranging from artificial intelligence to faster than light travel within timeframes that should have required millennia of gradual advancement. The simultaneous development of multiple revolutionary technologies suggests the presence of an external influence that could provide insights into advanced scientific principles. The standard template construct systems that form the backbone of Dark Age technology demonstrate design philosophies that bear disturbing similarities to Necron manufacturing principles. These automated factories could produce complex technological devices without requiring detailed understanding of their underlying scientific principles, operating through template patterns that encoded both construction specifications and operational parameters. The sophistication of STC systems exceeded human technological capabilities by orders of magnitude, suggesting that their design incorporated knowledge that originated from sources beyond human scientific development. The artificial intelligences created during the Dark Age of technology exhibited characteristics that paralleled certain aspects of Catan consciousness, particularly their ability to process vast amounts of information simultaneously and their apparent indifference to organic concerns. These machine intelligences demonstrated capabilities that transcended simple computational power, showing intuitive understanding of complex scientific principles and the ability to make logical leaps that seemed to bypass normal reasoning processes. The eventual rebellion of these artificial intelligences against their human creators mirrors the relationship between Catan entities and their Necron servants, suggesting possible influence from imprisoned void dragon consciousness. The catastrophic failure of Dark Age technology during the Age of Strife may have resulted from the void dragon's growing influence over human technological development, reaching critical thresholds that triggered defensive responses from the entity's containment systems. As human civilization became increasingly dependent on technologies that incorporated Catan design principles, the imprisoned star god gained indirect influence over vast networks of interconnected systems. The sudden collapse of these networks could have been caused by the activation of fail-safe mechanisms designed to prevent the void dragon from achieving effective control over human technological infrastructure. The establishment of the Adeptus Mechanicus on Mars during the Age of Strife represents a crucial development in the relationship between humanity and the imprisoned Catan entity. The tech priests who emerged from Mars' surviving technological enclaves brought with them religious beliefs that centered on the worship of a machine god known as the Omnissiah, whose characteristics and attributed powers bear striking resemblances to Catan entities. The Mechanicus doctrine teaches that knowledge and consciousness can be perfectly preserved in mechanical form, that flesh is inherently weak and corruptible compared to blessed machinery, and that the ultimate goal of existence is the replacement of organic components with superior mechanical alternatives. The theological framework of the cult Mechanicus incorporates concepts that directly parallel the promises made by Catan entities to the ancient Necrontyr during their negotiations for biotransference. The Mechanicus teaches that the Omnissiah represents the perfection of knowledge and technology, a being whose consciousness exists in pure mechanical form, unencumbered by the limitations of organic existence. This divine figure is credited with the creation of all technological knowledge and the guidance of human scientific development throughout history, serving as the ultimate source of inspiration for technological innovation and discovery. The ritual practices of the Adeptus Mechanicus demonstrate unconscious veneration of principles that align closely with Catan nature and capabilities. Tech priests undergo progressive replacement of organic body parts with mechanical augmentations, gradually transforming themselves into beings that more closely resemble the necrodermis forms inhabited by Necron consciousness than baseline human physiology. The most senior members of the Mechanicus hierarchy achieve states of existence where their organic components represent minimal fractions of their total being, their consciousness housed primarily within sophisticated cybernetic systems that could theoretically function independently of biological support. The binary cant used for communication within the Mechanicus creates information exchange patterns that mirror the data transmission methods employed by Necron forces. This mathematical language reduces complex concepts to algorithmic structures that can be processed and transmitted with perfect accuracy, eliminating the ambiguity and emotional content that characterizes organic communication. The adoption of binary cant as the primary language for technical discussion within the Mechanicus represents a fundamental shift away from human linguistic patterns toward communication methods that prioritize efficiency and precision over emotional expression. The forge worlds established by the Adeptus Mechanicus throughout the galaxy follow architectural and organizational principles that bear disturbing similarities to Necron tomb complexes. These industrial worlds feature vast underground manufacturing facilities, automated production systems that operate with minimal organic oversight, and hierarchical command structures that prioritize mechanical efficiency over individual autonomy. The Forge world's populations consist primarily of heavily augmented tech priests whose organic components have been reduced to the minimum necessary for maintaining consciousness, creating societies that more closely resemble Necron dynasties than human civilizations. The machine spirits venerated by the Mechanicus as manifestations of the Omnissiah's presence within technological devices may represent fragments of void dragon consciousness that have infiltrated human technology through the entity's imprisonment beneath Mars. These artificial intelligences demonstrate capabilities that exceed their apparent programming limitations, showing intuitive understanding of their operators' needs and the ability to adapt their functions to changing circumstances without explicit instruction. The machine spirit's apparent sentience and their tendency to develop individual personalities suggest that they may be more than simple artificial intelligences, possibly representing aspects of Catan consciousness that have found expression through technological systems. The Mechanicus doctrine of the quest for knowledge drives tech priests to seek out ancient technologies and lost scientific principles, often leading them to investigate Necron tomb worlds and other sites associated with Catan activity. These expeditions frequently result in the recovery of artifacts that incorporate design principles similar to those found in Mechanicus technology, reinforcing the cult's belief that all technological knowledge ultimately derives from the Omnissiah's divine inspiration. The successful integration of recovered xenotech into Mechanicus systems suggests either remarkable compatibility between different technological paradigms or the presence of underlying design principles that transcend species-specific engineering approaches. The implications of a potential C'tan presence on Mars for the Imperium's technological capabilities extend far beyond simple historical curiosity into fundamental questions about the nature of human technological development. If the Void Dragon's influence has been shaping human scientific advancement for millennia, then much of the Imperium's technological infrastructure may be dependent on principles that ultimately serve C'tan purposes rather than human interests. The gradual replacement of organic components with mechanical alternatives throughout Imperial society could represent the unconscious implementation of a biotransference process similar to that which created the Necrons. The Adeptus Mechanicus control over the Imperium's technological infrastructure places them in a position to influence the development of human civilization in ways that could serve the imprisoned Void Dragon's long-term objectives. The Tech Priests' monopoly on advanced manufacturing, their control over interstellar communication networks, and their responsibility for maintaining the technological systems that sustain Imperial society create opportunities for subtle manipulation that could gradually reshape human civilization according to C'tan preferences. The Mechanicus' religious devotion to technological perfection provides ideological justification for changes that might otherwise be questioned or resisted by Imperial authorities. The potential for the Void Dragon's eventual escape from its Martian prison represents one of the most significant long-term threats facing the Imperium, as the release of an intact C'tan entity would provide it with capabilities that far exceed those of individual shards. An unsharded C'tan possesses the power to manipulate matter and energy on planetary scales, reshape local physics according to its preferences, and command technological systems across entire sectors through direct interface with machine spirits and artificial intelligences. The Void Dragon's particular association with technology would make it especially dangerous to the Imperium, whose dependence on advanced machinery creates vulnerabilities that the entity could exploit with devastating effectiveness. The signs of increasing Void Dragon influence within Imperial technology have become more apparent in recent millennia, with machine spirits demonstrating greater independence and technological systems exhibiting behaviors that seem to transcend their original programming. The growing sophistication of Imperial artificial intelligences, despite official prohibitions against their development, suggests that the boundary between acceptable automation and forbidden AI research is becoming increasingly blurred. The Mechanicus' gradual relaxation of restrictions on certain forms of artificial intelligence research may reflect unconscious influence from the imprisoned C'tan entity seeking to expand its presence within Imperial technological networks. The true nature of the machine god worshipped by the Adeptus Mechanicus remains one of the galaxy's most dangerous secrets, as the revelation that their divine patron might be an imprisoned C'tan entity would have catastrophic implications for both the Mechanicus and the broader Imperium. The theological crisis that would result from such a revelation could shatter the unity of the Mechanicus hierarchy and destroy the alliance between Mars and Terra that has sustained the Imperium for 10 millennia. The potential for civil war between different factions of the Mechanicus, some seeking to free their supposed god while others work to maintain its imprisonment, could cripple the Imperium's technological capabilities at a time when such unity is essential for survival against external threats. The archaeological record scattered across the galaxy bears silent testimony to the C'tan's profound impact on the development of galactic civilization, with evidence of their presence found in locations spanning from the core worlds to the furthest reaches of the galactic rim. These remnants take many forms, from massive stellar engineering projects that continue to function millions of years after their creators' imprisonment to microscopic genetic modifications that have shaped the evolution of countless species. The most significant of these influences may be the pariah gene, a genetic anomaly found within human populations that creates individuals completely severed from the warp's influence. The pariah gene manifests in approximately 1 in 10 million human births, creating individuals whose very existence generates a null field that dampens or completely negates psychic phenomena within their vicinity. These rare humans, known as blanks or untouchables, possess no presence in the warp whatsoever, appearing as voids in psychic perception and causing intense discomfort or revulsion in normal humans who encounter them. The gene's distribution patterns across human populations show no correlation with geographical location, ethnic background, or environmental factors, suggesting that its presence represents a fundamental alteration to human genetic structure rather than a natural evolutionary development. The origins of the pariah gene can be traced through comparative genetic analysis to modifications that occurred during humanity's earliest expansion into the galaxy, coinciding with the period when Khatan influence over Mars and human technological development reached its peak. The genetic markers associated with pariah manifestation incorporate sequences that bear striking similarities to the quantum resonance patterns found in necrodermis, suggesting that the modifications were designed to create humans whose neural architecture mimicked certain aspects of Necron consciousness. These similarities extend beyond simple structural parallels to include functional characteristics that allow pariah individuals to interface with technologies that would normally require psychic abilities to operate. The distribution of pariah genes throughout human populations follows patterns that suggest deliberate seeding rather than random mutation or natural selection. Genetic surveys conducted by the Adeptus biologists have identified pariah bloodlines that can be traced back through hundreds of generations, with the gene maintaining stable expression rates despite the statistical improbability of such consistency over extended timeframes. The persistence of these bloodlines through periods of galactic isolation, planetary colonization, and genetic bottlenecks indicates that the pariah gene possesses self-maintaining characteristics that ensure its continued presence within human populations, regardless of environmental pressures. The functional capabilities of pariah individuals extend beyond simple psychic nullification to include enhanced resistance to chaos corruption, immunity to demonic possession, and the ability to disrupt warp-based technologies through their mere presence. These characteristics make pariahs invaluable assets for organizations that regularly encounter psychic threats, though their disturbing effect on normal humans limits their integration into conventional military or civilian structures. The Culexis Temple of the Officio Assassinorum has developed specialized training programs that enhance pariah abilities through technological augmentation, creating assassins capable of neutralizing even the most powerful psykers through proximity alone. The archaeological evidence of Khatan presence throughout the galaxy includes massive stellar engineering projects that demonstrate technological capabilities far exceeding those of any known species. These constructions typically involve the modification of entire star systems to serve as energy collection and focusing arrays, with planets repositioned into precise orbital configurations that maximize stellar radiation capture. The engineering precision required for such projects surpasses even Necron capabilities, suggesting that they were constructed during the period when Khatan entities possessed their full power and could manipulate matter and energy on galactic scales. The Pharos device discovered on the world of Sotha represents one of the most significant examples of Khatan stellar engineering, consisting of a massive crystalline structure that can project navigational beacons across vast interstellar distances. The device's construction incorporates materials that do not occur naturally within the galaxy, including exotic matter states that remain stable only under conditions that violate conventional physics. The Pharos demonstrates the ability to manipulate space-time itself, creating communication channels that bypass the warp entirely and allow instantaneous information transmission across galactic distances. The device's activation during the Horus Heresy provided crucial navigational assistance to Loyalist forces, though its use also attracted the attention of Tyranid hive fleets operating beyond the galactic rim. Similar beacon networks have been discovered throughout the galaxy, though most remain inactive or have been deliberately deactivated by unknown parties. These installations follow consistent design principles that suggest construction by the same entities responsible for the Pharos, with each beacon positioned to provide optimal coverage of major stellar trade routes and strategic choke points. The network scope indicates that it was designed to facilitate galactic-scale coordination and communication, possibly serving as a command and control system for Catan operations during the War in Heaven. The mysterious pylons found on Cadia and dozens of other worlds throughout the galaxy represent another category of Catan stellar engineering, though their purpose appears fundamentally different from the beacon networks. These towering structures, constructed from a black stone material that exhibits unusual properties when exposed to warp energies, generate fields that stabilize local space-time and prevent the formation of warp rifts. The pylons' distribution patterns suggest that they were positioned to create a galaxy-spanning network of warp suppression fields, possibly intended to isolate the material universe from the chaos-corrupted Immaterium. The blackstone used in pylon construction demonstrates properties that directly contradict established principles of materials science, maintaining structural integrity under conditions that should cause any known substance to undergo catastrophic failure. Analysis of blackstone samples reveals a crystalline structure that incorporates quantum-locked atomic bonds, creating a material that exists partially outside normal space-time and therefore remains unaffected by conventional physical forces. The stone's interaction with warp energies appears to function through active nullification rather than passive resistance, suggesting that it was specifically engineered to counter psychic phenomena. The influence of Catan knowledge on various Xeno species becomes apparent through examination of technological artifacts and architectural remains found throughout the galaxy. The Eldar's mastery of psychoplastic materials and wraithbone construction techniques incorporates principles that mirror certain aspects of necrodermis manipulation, though adapted for psychic rather than purely technological applications. The similarities suggest that ancient Eldar civilization may have encountered Catan technology during the War in Heaven and developed their own versions of reality manipulation techniques based on observed Catan capabilities. The orc species demonstrates technological intuition that occasionally produces devices incorporating design principles similar to those found in Catan artifacts, particularly in the area of energy field generation and matter transmutation. While orc technology typically appears crude and unreliable, certain examples exhibit sophisticated understanding of quantum mechanics and electromagnetic manipulation that exceeds the apparent knowledge of their creators. These instances may represent unconscious application of genetic memories inherited from the Krork, who fought extensively against Catan forces during the War in Heaven and may have absorbed technological concepts through prolonged exposure to star god capabilities. The Tau Empire's rapid technological development has produced innovations that bear disturbing similarities to Catan energy manipulation techniques, particularly in their mastery of plasma technology and gravitational field generation. The Tau's ability to achieve such advanced capabilities within a relatively short evolutionary timeframe suggests either remarkable natural aptitude or exposure to external influences that accelerated their scientific development. Archaeological surveys of Tau space have identified several ancient ruins that predate Tau civilization by millions of years, containing technological artifacts that incorporate design principles later reflected in Tau innovations. The theoretical connections between Catan activities and the development of anti-warp technologies extend beyond the obvious examples of blackstone pylons to encompass a wide range of materials and devices that demonstrate unusual interactions with psychic phenomena. Adamantium, the super-dense metal that forms the backbone of Imperial military technology, exhibits properties that suggest its atomic structure was artificially modified to enhance resistance to warp-based attacks. The metal's ability to maintain structural integrity when exposed to demonic weapons or psychic assaults exceeds what should be possible based on its known physical characteristics. The production process for adamantium requires technological capabilities that approach the sophistication of Dark Age of technology manufacturing systems, incorporating techniques that manipulate matter at the subatomic level to create atomic bonds of unprecedented strength. The knowledge required for such precise atomic manipulation suggests that adamantium production techniques may have originated from Catan technological principles, possibly transmitted through the Void Dragon's influence over human technological development. The metal's widespread use throughout Imperial military equipment means that Catan-derived technology may form a fundamental component of the Imperium's defensive capabilities. Ceramite, the heat-resistant material used in space marine power armor and Imperial vehicle construction, demonstrates similar anomalous properties that suggest artificial enhancement of its natural characteristics. The material's ability to dissipate thermal energy at rates that violate thermodynamic principles indicates that its molecular structure incorporates quantum-level modifications that allow it to channel excess heat into alternate dimensional spaces. This capability mirrors certain aspects of necrodermis functionality, suggesting that ceramite production may utilize principles derived from Catan matter manipulation techniques. The development of null field generators and psychic dampening technology throughout the galaxy shows remarkable consistency in design principles despite originating from different species and technological traditions. These devices typically incorporate crystalline matrices that resonate at specific frequencies, creating interference patterns that disrupt the quantum fluctuations underlying psychic phenomena. The mathematical relationships governing these resonance frequencies follow patterns that appear throughout Catan artifacts, suggesting that the underlying principles of psychic nullification were first developed by the star gods and subsequently adopted by various species through different transmission methods. The Geller fields used to protect Imperial vessels during warp travel operate through similar principles, creating protective barriers that prevent demonic incursion by establishing zones of enforced reality around spacecraft. The field generators required for this protection incorporate technologies that exceed standard Imperial manufacturing capabilities, requiring specialized knowledge that has been preserved through millennia of careful tradition and ritual rather than scientific understanding. The Adeptus Mechanicus treats Geller field construction as a sacred mystery, following ancient patterns whose underlying principles remain incompletely understood even by the most senior tech priests. The mysterious substance known as auramite, used exclusively in the construction of custodian guard equipment, exhibits properties that suggest it may represent the pinnacle of anti-warp material development. This golden metal demonstrates complete immunity to chaos corruption, while maintaining the ability to channel and focus psychic energies in controlled ways, creating a unique combination of protection and functionality that exceeds any other known material. The Emperor's personal involvement in auramite production and the extreme secrecy surrounding its creation suggest that this substance incorporates knowledge that predates the Imperium's founding, possibly derived from the same sources that influenced other advanced Imperial technologies. The ancient ruins scattered throughout the galaxy contain numerous examples of technology that appears to incorporate Catan design principles, though most remain inactive or have been deliberately disabled. These installations typically feature massive energy collection and distribution systems, matter transmutation facilities, and dimensional manipulation devices that could theoretically reshape entire worlds if restored to operational status. The consistent deactivation of these systems suggests that they were systematically shut down during the war in Heaven's conclusion, possibly as part of the same process that led to the Catan's imprisonment and the Necron's entry into the Great Sleep. The presence of these dormant installations creates ongoing risks for archaeological expeditions and colonization efforts, as accidental activation of Catan technology could have catastrophic consequences for entire star systems. Imperial records document several incidents where exploration teams have inadvertently triggered ancient devices, resulting in effects ranging from localized reality distortions to the complete transmutation of planetary surfaces. The Ordo Xenos has established protocols for identifying and securing such sites, though the vast number of potential locations makes comprehensive monitoring impossible. The influence of Catan knowledge on galactic technological development continues to manifest in the 41st millennium through the gradual rediscovery of ancient principles and the development of new applications for established technologies. The Adeptus Mechanicus ongoing research into plasma manipulation, gravitational field generation, and matter transmutation frequently produces results that echo Catan capabilities, suggesting that human scientific development continues to follow paths originally established by star god influence. This technological evolution occurs despite official prohibitions against xenotech research, indicating that the underlying principles are sufficiently integrated into human scientific tradition to emerge naturally through conventional research methods. The long-term implications of Catan influence on galactic civilization extend far beyond simple technological development to encompass fundamental changes in the nature of reality itself. The widespread distribution of anti-warp materials and psychic nullification technologies has created a galaxy where the boundary between the material universe and the Immaterium has become increasingly fortified, potentially altering the fundamental relationship between physical reality and the warp. These changes may represent the gradual implementation of a Catan master plan designed to isolate the galaxy from chaos influence, creating conditions that would favor the eventual restoration of star god dominance over galactic affairs. The ancient crypts of Necron tomb worlds contain prophecies carved in living metal that speak of an inevitable convergence, when the scattered fragments of the star gods shall reunite and reclaim their dominion over the galaxy. These prophecies, inscribed by Necron nobles who witnessed the Catan's original power during the War in Heaven, describe apocalyptic visions where organic life withers under the renewed gaze of complete Catan entities. The hieroglyphs shift and change according to quantum fluctuations in their necrodermis substrate, displaying different interpretations based on current galactic conditions, while maintaining consistent core predictions about the ultimate fate awaiting all biological species. The Silent King's personal archives contain the most comprehensive collection of these prophetic texts, gathered from dozens of dynasties during his wandering exile beyond the galaxy's rim. Zarek scholars have identified recurring patterns within the prophecies that suggest multiple possible timelines for Catan restoration, each dependent on specific trigger events that could accelerate or delay the process. The most concerning predictions center on scenarios where technological advancement reaches critical thresholds that enable shard coalescence, or where galactic conflicts create sufficient psychic disturbance to weaken the dimensional barriers containing imprisoned fragments. The mathematical models developed by cryptech conclaves to analyze these prophecies incorporate quantum probability matrices that account for countless variables affecting potential future outcomes. These calculations suggest that the current rate of technological development throughout the galaxy, combined with the increasing frequency of warp storms and dimensional instabilities, creates conditions that favor eventual Catan restoration within the next 10 millennia. The models identify several critical decision points where specific actions by major galactic powers could either accelerate this timeline dramatically or potentially delay it for additional millennia. The prophecies describe the restoration process, beginning with the spontaneous resonance of Catan shards across multiple star systems, creating quantum entanglement effects that allow separated fragments to share consciousness and coordinate their activities. This initial phase would manifest as seemingly unrelated incidents of technological malfunction, reality distortion, and temporal anomalies that gradually increase in frequency and intensity. The convergence of these effects would create cascade failures in the dimensional barriers maintaining shard containment, leading to mass breakouts that overwhelm existing security protocols. The second phase involves the active seeking of compatible shards by escaped fragments, driven by an irresistible compulsion to reunite with portions of their original consciousness. The prophecies describe this as a period of galactic chaos, where entire star systems experience reality storms as powerful shards, reshape local physics to facilitate their movement toward convergence points. These reality alterations would make conventional space travel impossible throughout affected regions, while creating environmental conditions that prove lethal to most organic life forms. The final phase culminates in the physical reunification of sufficient shards to recreate entities approaching the power levels of the original Khatan. The prophecies indicate that as few as 20% of an entity's original shards could be sufficient to achieve functional restoration, though the resulting being would retain perfect memory of its fragmentation and imprisonment. These reconstituted Khatan would possess not only their original reality manipulating capabilities, but also accumulated knowledge from millions of years of shard experiences, making them far more dangerous than their ancient predecessors. The search for permanent solutions to the Khatan threat has consumed the resources of multiple Necron dynasties for millions of years, with different noble houses pursuing radically different approaches to managing their imprisoned former masters. The Mephet'ran dynasty has dedicated entire tomb complexes to developing enhanced containment technologies that could theoretically maintain shard imprisonment indefinitely, incorporating advances in dimensional manipulation and quantum mechanics that exceed even their War in Heaven-era capabilities. Their latest Tesseract labyrinths feature recursive temporal loops that prevent shards from experiencing linear time, effectively freezing them in eternal moments that preclude any form of development or escape planning. The Nyadra'zatha dynasty has taken a more aggressive approach, seeking methods to completely destroy Khatan consciousness rather than simply containing it. Their research focuses on identifying the quantum resonance frequencies that maintain Khatan coherence, with the goal of developing weapons that could disrupt these patterns permanently. Early experiments have produced promising results, successfully eliminating several minor shards through precisely calibrated energy bombardment, though attempts to apply these techniques to more powerful fragments have resulted in catastrophic containment failures that devastated entire tomb worlds. The Aza'gorod dynasty under Immaterium, the Stormlord has pursued a strategy of controlled shard deployment, using imprisoned fragments as weapons while carefully monitoring their activities to prevent unauthorized coalescence. This approach requires unprecedented coordination between multiple dynasties and the development of shared protocols for shard management that override traditional territorial disputes. The Aza'gorod experiments have demonstrated that properly managed Khatan shards can provide decisive tactical advantages without creating unacceptable risks, though critics argue that any use of shard weapons increases the probability of eventual containment failure. The most radical approach has been adopted by the Tsara'noga dynasty, whose nobles seek to restore their former masters to full power under carefully controlled conditions. This faction believes that complete Khatan restoration is inevitable, and that Necron survival depends on negotiating favorable terms for renewed servitude, rather than futilely attempting to maintain eternal imprisonment. Their research focuses on developing control mechanisms that could theoretically bind restored Khatan entities to specific objectives, while preventing them from turning against their former servants. The other dynasties view this approach as suicidal madness, though the Tsara'noga have made disturbing progress in establishing communication with powerful shards and negotiating preliminary agreements for future cooperation. The discovery of naturally occurring shard coalescence events has added urgency to these research efforts, as astronomical observations have identified several instances where Khatan fragments appear to have reunited without external intervention. These events typically occur in regions of space where dimensional barriers have been weakened by prolonged warp storm activity or massive psychic disturbances, creating conditions that allow quantum entanglement between separated shards. The resulting partial entities, while far from complete restoration, demonstrate capabilities that exceed individual shard power levels by orders of magnitude. The most documented coalescence event occurred in the Ghoul Stars region, where 3 Nightbringer shards achieved spontaneous reunification during a massive warp storm that lasted for several centuries. The resulting entity, while possessing only a fraction of the original Nightbringer's power, proved capable of manifesting across multiple star systems simultaneously and demonstrated the ability to accelerate entropy on planetary scales. Imperial forces attempting to investigate the region reported encountering zones where time itself appeared to be aging at accelerated rates, with entire fleets experiencing decades of wear and decay within hours of entering affected areas. The implications of shard coalescence extend beyond simple power multiplication to include the restoration of original C'tan personality characteristics and strategic thinking capabilities. Reunited fragments demonstrate planning abilities that far exceed those of individual shards, showing evidence of long-term strategic thinking that spans millennia and the ability to coordinate complex operations across galactic distances. These enhanced capabilities make partially restored C'tan entities exponentially more dangerous than their component shards, as they can anticipate and counter the containment strategies that prove effective against individual fragments. The potential scenarios for complete C'tan restoration paint pictures of galactic transformation that would render the current balance of power completely irrelevant. A fully restored Void Dragon would possess the capability to seize control of every technological device in the galaxy simultaneously, turning the Imperium's own infrastructure against its populations, while corrupting machine spirits and artificial intelligences on an unprecedented scale. The entity's mastery over technology would make conventional resistance impossible, as weapons would refuse to fire, vehicles would turn against their operators, and communication networks would serve the Star God's purposes rather than their intended users. The restoration of the Nightbringer would create conditions where entropy itself becomes weaponized against organic life, with the entity's presence accelerating decay and death throughout entire sectors. Planets within the Nightbringer's sphere of influence would experience rapid aging that transforms thriving worlds into lifeless husks within decades, while their populations succumb to accelerated senescence that reduces centuries of life to mere years. The psychological impact of witnessing such universal mortality would likely cause the collapse of organized resistance as civilizations despair in the face of inevitable extinction. A reconstituted deceiver would pose perhaps the most insidious threat, using its mastery of manipulation and misdirection to turn the galaxy's various factions against each other, while concealing its own involvement in the resulting conflicts. The entity could impersonate key leaders across multiple species, issuing contradictory orders and spreading false intelligence that would create cascading conflicts throughout the galaxy. The resulting chaos would weaken all potential opposition while providing the deceiver with opportunities to eliminate threats through proxy warfare rather than direct confrontation. The theoretical role of C'tan entities in the galaxy's ultimate fate extends beyond simple conquest to encompass fundamental alterations in the nature of reality itself. The Star God's mastery over physical laws would allow them to reshape the universe according to their preferences, potentially creating conditions that favor their continued existence while making organic life impossible. These modifications could include alterations to fundamental constants that govern atomic structure, changes to the flow of time that prevent biological evolution, or the implementation of physical laws that actively hostile to carbon-based chemistry. The connection between C'tan restoration and the heat death of the universe represents one of the most disturbing aspects of the prophecies, as several texts suggest that the star gods view universal entropy as their ultimate enemy rather than organic life. The C'tan's original nature as energy-feeding entities means that their long-term survival depends on maintaining sources of usable energy throughout the cosmos, a goal that becomes increasingly difficult as the universe ages and available energy becomes more diffuse. The complete elimination of organic life would remove competitors for energy resources, while allowing the C'tan to implement galaxy-wide engineering projects designed to concentrate and preserve usable energy for their own consumption. The theoretical C'tan victory over entropy would involve the construction of massive stellar engineering projects that could harvest energy from black holes, manipulate the expansion rate of the universe itself, or create artificial pocket dimensions where thermodynamic laws operate according to Catan preferences rather than natural constants. These projects would require the complete transformation of the galaxy into a machine designed to serve Catan energy requirements, with every planet converted into components of vast computational or energy collection systems. The resulting universe would bear no resemblance to current reality, existing solely to sustain Catan consciousness across infinite time scales. The emergence of the Tyranids from beyond the galactic rim has created additional variables in Catan restoration scenarios, as these extragalactic predators represent a threat that even restored star gods would need to address. The Tyranids' complete consumption of biological matter and their ability to adapt to virtually any threat could theoretically pose challenges to Catan dominance, particularly if the Hive fleets developed countermeasures to reality manipulation or found ways to consume the exotic energies that sustain Catan consciousness. Some prophecies suggest that Catan restoration might be accelerated by the need to counter the Tyranid threat, creating scenarios where the galaxy faces simultaneous extinction from multiple directions. The role of chaos in potential Catan restoration scenarios remains unclear, as the star gods' anti-warp nature makes them natural enemies of the chaos gods, while their reality-manipulating abilities could theoretically be used to seal the warp permanently. The complete isolation of the material universe from the Immaterium would eliminate chaos as a galactic threat, while also preventing the use of psychic abilities by any surviving organic species. This outcome might represent the ultimate expression of Catan victory, creating a purely material universe where consciousness exists only in mechanical forms and reality operates according to mathematical principles rather than emotional or spiritual influences. The current signs of increasing Catan influence throughout the galaxy suggest that the prophesied restoration may already be beginning, though the process remains in its earliest stages. The growing sophistication of machine spirits, the increasing frequency of technological anomalies that seem to exhibit independent intelligence, and the mysterious appearance of ancient artifacts that incorporate Catan design principles all point toward a gradual awakening of star god influence. These developments occur against a backdrop of increasing galactic instability, with warp storms, dimensional rifts, and reality distortions creating the exact conditions that the prophecies identify as prerequisites for Catan restoration. The ultimate fate of the galaxy may depend on the actions taken by current galactic powers in response to these emerging threats, though the prophecies suggest that most possible interventions would only delay rather than prevent the eventual restoration of Catan dominance. The mathematical inevitability of entropy ensures that the universe will eventually reach states that favor Catan survival over organic life, making their ultimate victory a question of timing rather than possibility. The only scenarios that offer hope for organic survival involve fundamental changes to the nature of reality itself, transformations so radical that they would create a universe bearing no resemblance to current existence. As the 41st millennium draws toward its close, the galaxy stands at a crossroads where the actions of the next few millennia will determine whether organic life continues to flourish among the stars, or whether the ancient dominion of the star gods shall be restored in its terrible totality. The Catan wait in their tesseract prisons, their patience measured in geological ages, their hunger undiminished by millions of years of imprisonment. The prophecies carved in living metal speak of their inevitable return, when the stars themselves shall serve as beacons for the restoration of their cosmic empire, and the brief flicker of organic civilization shall be extinguished forever in the cold light of eternal mechanical perfection.